Alright. Chapter 12. Nowhere Land. Alright, let me just adjust the mic a bit. Okay. Um, Once I returned to the UK from Romania, everything unraveled. I did a lot of drugs. I don't know how else to put it. Normally, I wouldn't have even known where to find cocaine, let alone blow through as much as I did in a single week. But Tommy offered me a bag, saying it would help take the edge off things. I had told him and the boys what had happened almost immediately after getting into the cab to the airport. Andrew walked me to the hotel exit where Tommy and the boys were waiting in the car, gave me a hug, and as soon as the taxi door slammed shut behind me, I blurted it out. I said in a weird manic laughter, you won't believe what the fuck just happened kind of way, but I was damn clear. The boys laughed too, and Tommy looked at me and said, you serious, mate? I said yeah, and got into the darker details. The laughter lingered for a beat, like they were waiting for the psych, waiting for the punchline that never came. We Googled Tate on the flight home, curious to learn more about who he really was. Apparently, he had a brief brush with fame on Big Brother, before being removed from the house after videos surfaced showing him hitting a woman with a belt. The more I scrolled, the more foolish I felt for having ended up in this situation. But by that point, it didn't matter. It was just one more absurdity in a world full of them, another drop in the pan of chaos we're all too used to. And Tommy wasn't wrong about the coke. It did take the edge off. A bit of Patriot powder up my nose, and all my problems felt manageable. I entered in an entirely different realm and had no desire to leave it. I didn't feel guilty. Who was I really hurting but myself? If I've got my timeline right, I had only been offered hard drugs once before. Early on in my rebel days, I ended up at some alleged MTV producer's house thanks to a few new coworkers. Lines were being cut on the table. I remember my eyes widening at the sight of a substance I'd only ever seen on a screen. When the plate was offered to me, I conjured every ounce of youth group train I had and firmly said no. The hangout wrapped up pretty quickly after that. I felt like Galadriel refusing the One Ring. I passed the test. What I didn't know then was that the real test comes when you actually have something you want to escape, and I failed that test immediately. It all started practically the day after returning from Romania. Tommy had taken me, a girlfriend, and the team to some gay club. What? Okay. I hadn't been clubbing with them before, but from what I understood, Tommy often chose gay clubs to avoid running into Muslims. No way, bro. No, there's no way, bro. At some point near the bar, surrounded by dancing college students and thudding music, he pulled out the bag and shoved it into my hand. Take it to the bathroom, love, he told me. Don't let anyone see ya, he added, shifting nervously and glancing around. Then, like a game of charades, he covered one nostril, mine holding the key to the other, and mimicked a dramatic snort before sending me off with a nod. By the 15th trip back to the stalls, I remember a guy and two girls literally pulling themselves up over the divider to catch me in the act. One even had a camera phone out. And the one time I wasn't doing the line, they caught me mid piss. I remember being so high that I couldn't decide whether to panic about ending up on Twitter or laugh at the whole thing. Luckily, there was more coke to fix that dilemma. And my god, was it great. I didn't feel a thing. No pain, no memories, just an overwhelming electric will to keep going, living for the next hit of whatever the hell was in that little plastic bag. Jesus, dude, that's crazy. That's scary, dude. At the same time, my team was deep in the edits for Farmlands. I didn't sleep for days. There was always more coke, always another line to keep the thoughts away. I remember pacing the room, rubbing my increasingly raw nose, scribbling manic notes on the editing screen, then collapsing on the floor and peeking through the blinds. Kyle and George, they sent spies to say he's watching me. I rolled to the other side of the window, then sneaked another glance. Callan, caught between laughter and concern, will pull out his phone to record me, just in case I forgot my own sanity later. What did you say, Lauren? He's asked, say it again. Looking back, it's easy to dismiss it as the ramblings of a paranoid cokehead, but in a funny way, I might not have been entirely wrong. The whole thing was a blur of chaos. Clubs, dealers, hanging out of Lucy Brown's car window, manic blasting music while on the way to get more soul pounding. I remember stumbling into an old English church graveyard, high as a kite, clutching a bottle of wine in a brown bag. It was snowing in the middle of my blender. I posted a photo to my increasingly popular Instagram. So peaceful here. One comment read, yes, so trad indeed. Well, it might have felt like a kind of fun on the surface, By the end of it, I think I was losing my mind. That might sound dramatic, but I'm not exaggerating. I felt something hollow open up inside me, cold, dark, empty, and I let it in. It wasn't because of the drugs, though, really. You can overdo anything. I'll take a coke addict over a Puritanism addict any day. At least one of them is chasing something real. The excess was just a symptom. The real problem was the emptiness underneath. I didn't care anymore. Whatever your beliefs may be, I do believe in good and evil, and what I felt then was a total separation from anything sacred. The worst part, I wanted it. I didn't think I deserved anything else, yet my own destroyed sense of self began to morph my behaviors. I hadn't yet learned that life has to be carved out with your own hands. It costs sweat, blood, and pain. The world is harsh, and you can't just coast through it hoping things work out. No one is coming to save you. You know, someone told me that same words before. They told me that no one's coming to, no one. They basically said no one is going to help you in life, and then that shocked me because I thought you have a partner that would come to do that for you, your spouse, whatever. But so for them to tell me that, I was pretty shocked, dude. I really hope it's not true. But I guess here's Lauren Southern saying the same thing. No one's coming to save you. There are no perfect heroes, no one to define right and wrong on your behalf. If you want goodness in the world, you have to create yourself. I thought that standing with the good guys would make me good too, that their goodness would somehow rub off on me. But good is a slippery word. In every group, the good guys are just the ones best at performing their ideology being worshipped. The better you are at the performance, the more good you seem, regardless of what you believe or who you really are. I bought into it. I thought my anger was righteous, my compromises necessary. But the closer I got to power, to the adults in charge, the more I saw how hollow it was, and how much of myself I was losing to play along. I'm currently reading That Hideous Strength by C.S. Lewis and watching as the character Mark Studdock gets slowly entangled in the machinery of evil, disguised, of course, as networks of doctors, scientists, politicians, and journalists, both left and right for that matter, working together to garner control of the population. The group calling themselves Nice manufactures chaos by importing a criminal underclass into a small town under the guise of work projects. The resulting unrest is then used to justify a harsh police crackdown, giving the organization even more power to control the local population. Stock has been brought into the group because he's an excellent writer, and they let him know that they have a riot prepared in a few days. They need him to cover. The group tells him that he must submit his article the morning before the riot. They laugh at him when he asks, "How can I write about a news event before it happens?" In their world, it's so obvious that you lie to create the chaos needed, or to control the narrative. In an embarrassed tone, he admits that he's always preferred doing things the proper way, but now supposes he understands the need to manipulate the narrative for the greater good of the cause. An excerpt from this section reads, "This was the first thing Mark had been asked to do, which he himself, before he did it, clearly knew to be criminal. But the moment of his consent almost escaped his notice. Certainly there was no struggle, no sense of turning a corner. There may have been a time in the world's history where such moments fully reveal the gravity with which it prophesies on a blasted health or visible Rubicorns to be crossed. But for him, it all slipped past in a chatter of laughter, of that intimate laughter between fellow professionals, which of all earthly powers is strongest to make men do very bad things before they are yet, individually, very bad men. I can't help but reflect on the many times I found myself in Studdock's position, hearing the laughter of my peers over things I found questionable, but laughing along anyway to avoid seeming naive or out of step. Oh, this is how it works, I think. We cover for each other, we do drugs each other, we bend the truth to get funding. It wasn't the actions themselves that really unsettled me, it was the performance. The way we spoke as if we were rebuilding civilization, positioning ourselves as the moral counterweight to a decaying world, all while living quiet hypocrisy. Though what I hated most about it all, meaning the peers and heroes of my movement, was that I was staring into the mirror of my future, and the only way out seemed to be abandoning every ounce of success I had ever known. What are the 5 stages of grief again? Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. I had passed denial and was now firmly in the anger phase, slowly inching towards bargaining. While my childhood faith was deeply imprinted on my mind, it had become little more than a habitual psychological itch. God, are you there? Can you help me? I would murmur inwardly, but there was no real faith behind my plea. I'm sorry for who I've become and how far I've strayed. I wasn't sure if I was talking to God or to the idealistic child in me who would be heartbroken to see the state of my soul. I believe many people today remain Christian, either because of the comforts of belonging to a social club or out of fear of abandoning childhood beliefs. Their faith isn't necessarily a genuine spiritual commitment, but tradition they cling to. Genuinely wrestling with inner turmoil can almost feel sacrilegious. I've spent enough time in religious spaces, especially the political ones, to see the hypocrisy firsthand. Many preach about welcoming the broken, but then whisper about how disgusting that brokenness is once it enters the room. Within political Christianity, especially, there's a startling lack of trust in the process God takes each of us through. There's this demand for instant conversion, proclaim your faith today or be damned, rather than walking with people patiently, the way Christ does with us, the way friends like my Professor Ron has done with me. If you ever stumble across a Twitter account with a cross in the bio and a Crusader profile pic only to find a spewing judgmental bio, I point you to Matthew 15:7-9 or John 4:20. I'll say this. Those who loudly profess Christianity online and those who do so in real life often feel like entirely different species. The same is true for those who profess Christianity in real life versus those who actually live and act Christ-like. They too seem like different species. I've at least briefly inhabited all of these spaces, hoping each day to become more like the last. Oh, damn, I guess that does feel true. Although I haven't been to church in over a month, several people from the congregation have reached out to ask where I've been. They've been nothing but warm and well-meaning, but the weight of that social pressure is hard to ignore. A year ago, it would have worked. I would have dressed up, sat awkwardly in the back row, and gone through the motions just to keep everyone happy. But today, I chose not to go. Rebuilding my relationship with God and self has meant learning to resist those old people-pleasing tendencies. Community matters, and imagine I'll return to some form of church when it feels right, when it's rooted in intention, not obligation. Because truthfully, church wasn't where I first learned to connect with God. It was where I learned to conform. The pressure wasn't always bad, of course, but when morality is driven by the environment, it shifts when the environment does. I've been swept up in that kind of momentum before, following the feeling of a movement instead of the principles behind it. I care too much about the state of my soul and those I love to let myself slide back into comfortable habits that look good but lack depth. So for now, I'm choosing honesty. Writing, reading, sitting in silence, it may not look like much from the outside, but it's the most intentional thing I've done in a while. And yes, a younger version of me would have called this a clever excuse to stay home and scroll Twitter. I get it. But I'm serious, I hit the darkest point in my life, in parts because my morals were inherited rather than understood. My faith, like a worn security blanket trailing behind a toddler, had become so tattered and stained that I no longer recognized its original purpose. Was it ever truly a blanket, or is it just something I couldn't let go of because its familiarity soothed me in a world I didn't understand? I believe one of the greatest challenges facing modern Protestantism is the disconnect between professed faith and actual Christ-like living. Many Protestant communities have become fertile ground for performative Christianity, where belief is loudly proclaimed but rarely embodied, and moral conformity is valued more than spiritual authenticity. In the effort to welcome everyone, churches often avoid discomfort, building messaging around minimizing resistance to entry. Unlike Catholicism, which at least requires catechism to ensure a baseline understanding, Protestantism can sometimes feel like an Oprah episode. Check under your seat. You get a redemption, and you get redemption. Everyone gets redemption. But redemption isn't exactly free. I mean, it is, but it requires effort. It demands real understanding. That doesn't happen overnight. In my case, it didn't happen over 20 years of church attendance and Christian education. I remember being 18 at a modern Bible study, the kind with a beanie-wearing youth pastor and Blundstones tattoos, and a love for Mumford and Sons. At one point, I asked the group what they thought about Timothy 2:12. Paul repeats this theme elsewhere, like in 1 Corinthians. I wasn't looking to be controversial, I was genuinely curious. The room fell silent. After an awkward pause, the leader deflected. That's a complex verse, maybe not something we need to get into right now. And just like that, the topic was dropped. Bro, I think it's pretty clear. These people, especially these like church people, it's hard for them to like be able to explain it if they don't actually do it themselves, which takes effort, and that's really difficult. I guess that's also a sign of what Christianity has come to nowadays, though, huh? Oh, that's really difficult then. It was a moment that struck with me, not because of the verse itself, but because of what it revealed. In many Protestant spaces today, young Christians are handed rules before they're handed roots. We've often given a surface-level framework of biblical values without historical depth or spiritual formation. Uncomfortable scriptures are skipped or sanitized, and yet the same communities insist the Bible alone is the source of all truth. It's a strange kind of functional Gnosticism, elevating the text as the only authority while refusing to engage in deeply with what it actually says or where it came from. The text is treated as static and simplistic rather than living and complex. The result, I think, is confusion, sometimes even weaponization. I often wonder if this avoidance is what set the stage of today's online explosion of Christian sexism. I don't mean the eye roll kind manspreading and microaggressions, but the genuinely dehumanizing rhetoric that's becoming too common. Guys with crosses in their bios calling any woman who disagrees with them whores or Jezebels, all in the name of some bastardized biblical authority. When questions about gender and authority are met with silence in youth groups, but later found online without context or spiritual maturity, it creates fertile ground for rigid reactionary interpretations. In just the first week of my graduate studies, I've already encountered a completely different way of approaching Christianity. In Dante's Divine Comedy, which I cited earlier, four women, Mary, Beatrice, Lucy, and Rachel, support Dante's spiritual journey. They embody contemplation, insight, love, and divine grace. Their roles challenge the narrative that Christian tradition has always been unthinking or patriarchal. Dante, like Augustine before him, drew not only from scripture, but from classical sources, Homer, Seneca, Cicero, to shape a vision of the Christian life that was rich, remembered, and whole. Well, I'm no theologian, these are questions I wrestled with, and they seem to reflect a broader trend. Modern Christianity often loses touch with its deeper heritage. Some scholars call it memoricide, a kind of cultural and spiritual amnesia. And when memory fades, so does context. We lose the tools to grapple with hard questions, defaulting instead to either rigid legalism or vague sentimentality. The result, a generation that clings to rules but never encounters the love or depth that gives those rules meaning. It wasn't church or even the Bible alone that helped me confront the questions that haunted me. It was reflections and books outside those spaces that finally met me where I was. The hardest was the idea of hell. I couldn't reconcile eternal damnation with the goodness of people I loved, who weren't Christian. That thought drove me from my childhood faith. It wasn't until I read The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis that my view began to shift. For the first time, heaven and hell felt not only theological coherent, but deeply loving. Lastly, maybe most importantly, there are the age-old questions. Why does God let bad things happen? Why does He allow pain and suffering? These are questions that unravel the faith of many unsheltered Protestant kids the moment they hit their first university philosophy course. I've seen the statistic. 2/3 of teens who attend church stop going as adults. That doesn't surprise me. It was my story too. There's a vast difference between... Oh, damn. Actually, enough even for my spirituality. I find the same thing. 2/3, huh? Oh, that's sad. There's a vast difference between reading theology and watching it play out in real life. Theories crumble under pressure, and honestly, I'm glad mine did. My early view of God was shaped by platitudes, people-pleasing, and cartoonish Bible stories. Painting cheerful whales swallowing Jonah might be cute in Sunday school, but it won't anchor you in the storm. The truth is, nothing about my religious upbringing practically prepared me for what happens when everything falls apart. But to be fair, it's hard to imagine when a youth pastor is supposed to bring up, "Now kids, here's what to do if you find yourself in a coke-fueled spiral through European politics." That talk rarely makes it onto whiteboard between fellowship night and pizza and psalms, and frankly, most of them hadn't experienced anything like it themselves. They were often just a few years older, armed with acoustic guitars and a vague memory of their own PG-13 rebellion. Great at quoting proverbs, less equipped for a conversation about being banned from the UK after being detained under the Terrorism Act. Oh yeah, that happens. Oops. Though to be honest, my banishment from Britain would mark the beginning of something far more important than any protest or headline. It was the start of a deeper, more honest conversation I would have with myself. The first real attempt to answer the very question I've avoided for years. Was there any meaning to all this pain and chaos? Oh, so now she's thinking about the meaning, bro. Alright, so that's chapter 12, chapter 13. You know, I share the same sentiment with Lauren. Like, the idea of hell is probably the scariest idea, bro. That's something that's gonna haunt a lot of people. When they do bad things, they realize that if they done bad things, but they know they've done bad things, and like, oh shit. Am I gonna go to hell because of that, dude? I mean, there's a lot of vices nowadays. Damn. Tough. Au revoir. Chapter 13. When I returned to the UK from Romania, as mentioned, I went on an unhinged trauma-induced bender. Plain and simple. I'm sure all the government officials were upset about me clearing out the nation's gear supply. They ended up banning me from the entire country, though there were a few other reasons why they weren't particularly impressed with me either. Once again, in my completely delusional, drugged-up state, I came up with ideas no one in their right mind would ever consider executing. In particular, my plan to set up a Pride Parade booth in the town of Luton. If you're from the UK, reading that sentence probably already has you wincing. If you're not from the UK, let me set the stage here for why one does not simply walk into London with a rainbow flag. London is perhaps the most Islamic town in the entire United Kingdom. This isn't just some far-right internet exaggeration. You can find headlines from 2017 published by NBC News titled London, UK commuter town with reputation as a jihadi breeding ground. The town was home to various extremists, including radical Islamist preacher Anjem Choudary, who was jailed for life for directing people to join ISIS. I took my 2 gay videographers and a few other friends with me as we set up a booth featuring Allah's the Gay God, rainbow posters, along with Allah is all of us. Oh, Jesus, dude. These were common sentiments often seen at Western pride parades when dealing with Christianity, but this time I simply transposed them onto Islam. It wasn't even an original idea, it was twisted reflection of what had been done to Christian beliefs for years. In fact, around that time, outlets like the Huffington Post and others began publishing articles with headlines like Jesus, the first transgender man. I scoffed thinking, wow, how brave, making a mockery of a religion that would never lay a finger on you. They would never dare to do this with Islam. I thought to myself, the last time a major newspaper dared to publish a significant criticism of the Prophet Muhammad was met with a terrorist attack, Charlie Hebdo. In that attack, 12 of the magazine's staff members were shot and killed, and 11 others were injured by Said and Sheriff Kuechi, who yelled, "We have avenged the Prophet Muhammad," before fleeing the scene. It was during this wave of Islamic terror that swept through Europe in the mid to late 2010s that I, along with many other content creators, became obsessed with the issue. The woman who printed our posters looked at us in abject horror as we were walking straight to our deaths. So we marched into London town square, set up a folding table, pinned everything up, and launched into our outreach. The sight of Calvin handling posters to women in burqas had me howling with laughter. It didn't take long before a crowd gathered around us, screaming threats, spitting at us, and calling for the police. Exactly as I expected, the sort of reversal wasn't met with the same liberal support for freedom of speech that Christianity often gets. Honestly, it wasn't any sort of novel discovery. I should have just accepted people already knew this. But it has simply been socially outlawed to point out. It wasn't just the local population in London, though. The British government seemed equally eager to enforce their religious censorship. We were threatened with arrest if we didn't immediately dismantle our booth and leave, so we did. That's crazy, bro. Of course, they know it too. I left the UK after this and went home for a week, drinking more sodapine than usual during the entire flight back. By the time I returned to Toronto, I was a mess. I sat on my deck, chain smoking, and began to collect a closet full of empty wine bottles. I went to the hospital for all the necessary health tests and ended up making an assault report about Romania. Okay, I even sat through a government therapy session, which was about as depressing and useless as you expect. Bro, I thought it was useless. Looking around at the Socialist Alliance pins and pride flags in the office, all I could think was, I'm supposed to get help from the same people who tell me they hope I die on Twitter? I gave up on that quickly, but at least I had one thing to celebrate. All of my tests came back negative. I did more drugs. Then it was back on another plane to Europe for a speech, followed by a bus trip through Calais to meet Calvin and George in the UK for another project. Whew. I'm gonna stop here for a bit. Take a breath. Who is here? Oh, it's... Wait, I'm gonna pause real quick. Alright. Let's see. When we reached the Calais channel, everyone on the bus was ordered to get off to have their passports stamped. I stood in line, stepped up to the counter, and handed my passport over. The man behind the desk scanned my passport, his eyes widening as he looked at the screen. He asked me to wait. What was supposed to be just a minute stretched into much longer. By the time he returned, the entire bus had been processed. He was now joined by what looked like police officers who asked if my luggage was on the bus. I told them it was, and they moved to collect it. The bus moved on, and I was taken into custody. Alright, let me just move the microphone closer. Alright. I wasn't exactly sure what was going on, but I was led to a holding room where a guard was waiting. I was left alone, sitting on a mat in a stark, cold room with signage on the walls in various languages, explaining what I was assumed were my rights and the rules. On the counter in the corner, there was a Quran and a Bible. I glanced at them nervously, thinking I wouldn't need to worry about any reading. Surely this will all be sorted soon. Eventually, a man in a police uniform entered the room and handed me a pamphlet. You're being detained under Schedule 7 of the Terrorism Act 2000. This pamphlet should explain any details you need to know. We'll have you come in for questioning shortly. He then asked for my phone. I said no. He demanded again. I refused again. He left and I sat back on my mat under the sterile lighting, flipping through my cheerful little brochure on how I'd apparently lost all my rights. I honestly couldn't believe what I was reading. I hadn't realized Western countries had laws like this on the books. The pamphlet made it clear I would be detained for up to 6 hours for questioning, which could be extended for up to 14 days. They had full search powers over all my belongings and could seize anything, no warrant required. I had no right to remain silent, and I could only request legal representation after a certain amount of questioning time had passed. Wait, what? I thought everyone got to remain silent and ask for a lawyer, unless you're kidnapped by thugs. Is this really what the UK has become? I was soon taken in for my first round of questioning. It was a small room with 3 officers crammed in, filling with a giant recording device on the table. Please say your name and birthday, they said. Just like in the movies, the questions came quickly. How do you feel about driving a bus into a group of people? I laughed. Was this seriously how they question terrorists? Did they really expect me to say something like, oh yeah, I love doing that. We're planning to give it a go as soon as you let me through. Giddy up. They kept going, firing off what felt like the most absurd questions on earth. Was I a Christian radical? Would I call myself a white supremacist? Was I planning any extremist attacks? What kind of groups was I associated with? The white supremacist stuff, in particular, was getting on my nerves. Didn't they realize those people had canceled me ages ago for not being racist? Clearly, they weren't spending much time on 4chan. Not to mention, while I brushed shoulders with some radical people by that point in my life, I never joined any extremist groups. I never joined any groups at all. I was there to make YouTube videos, get clicks, and bring the action to people at home. Though I also joined peaceful protests across America and Europe, which I framed as my Hunter S. Thompson-style gonzo journalism. You can laugh and say that's not journalism, and maybe you're right, but I've never been found to have broken any laws, and I was always peaceful. Perhaps the government had been monitoring me during my bender and decided I was a threat. Perhaps they thought I was heading down a dangerous path. I don't know. It all felt surreal. I was returned to my holding cell and offered some curry. I laughed at the implication. Curry. I clearly wasn't their usual border asset. I didn't want it. I didn't eat much those days. I lay down on the mat on the floor and glanced over at the Bible sitting on the counter. I picked it up and started reading. At that point in my life, and honestly, up until very recently, whenever I opened the Bible, it felt like reading the warranty manual for a washing machine. I desperately wanted to feel something, to extract meaning from the pages, but they lay there still and lifeless. A blur of words I've heard parroted by joyless adults so often in childhood they lost all meaning. I felt myself praying anyways, praying to a God I didn't think would answer the call, praying for something to change, for my life to take a different path. I was brought in for questioning again. They began making threats, demanding the passcode to my phone immediately. I joked that they just wanted to find naughty photos in my album. That didn't go well. They were just getting angrier. The questioning dragged on into the early hours of the morning until I finally demanded a lawyer. Enough time had passed for them to be legally required to grant me one, but we were in Calais, and the only English-speaking lawyers would have to travel across the channel, and likely weren't even awake yet. They were stuck. I was returned to my holding cell and waited longer. I tried to nap, but couldn't. I felt like a zoo animal under the watchful eye of a guard, trapped in a cage with the relentless buzz of overhead lights. The night stretched into morning. Eventually an officer came in with a piece of paper, and notified me that, by decree of the Home Secretary, I had been banned from the country for stirring up hatred, specifically for my little pride parade in Luton. 2 officers escorted me to a new, smaller holding cell while I awaited processing. I was thrilled to get a breath of fresh air on the walk. Even better, my new quarters had a window. As for the whole ordeal, I felt numb. It was all just silly. It is what it is, I told myself, another bizarre chapter in the ever-growing lore of my life. But deep down, I wasn't sure how many more it is what it is copes I had left in me. Then, as I glanced down at the paper in my hand, something dawned on me. This was a good thing. Looking back now, it's almost funny. The news went wild when word got out about my ban. Tucker Carlson covered it, the Daily Mail, the Mirror. Just about every major outlet ran stories about the injustice of my exclusion from the UK and how it discriminated against people with right-wing views. That was true, but once again, the media war and the reality of my real life bore little resemblance to each other. In some odd way, it really felt that rather than England protecting itself from me, I was being protected from England. The drugs, the chaos, the crime, the influence of it all. My small prayer for change being answered in an unlikely way. My soul had not undergone any meaningful transformation yet, but I had been shielded from a place that would have corroded it further. A small victory, one for good, yet in the public eye, it was perceived as a massive injustice, a harm done to me. I get why on a practical level, of course, yet the online world is deceptive, a hall of mirrors. You can never see what's truly going on in the hearts of men or women, and I feel that's perhaps its purpose. Anyway, they finally let me out the next morning. No one prepares you for being kicked out of a country. Do they help you get a flight home? Do they escort you to the local bus stop? No. And in my case, they literally walked me to the giant border gate, opened it, and said au revoir. There I was with a small rolling suitcase, practically in the middle of nowhere. I walked until I found a McDonald's. Those golden arches came to save me yet again. It was 6 a.m. It hadn't opened yet. My phone was dead. I sat outside, starving, until a staff member showed up, confused by my presence on the stairs. I couldn't begin to describe the sheer joy, relief, and salvation I felt from the simple act of plugging in my phone and ordering some kind of French breakfast nonsense. I eventually made it out. I gave a speech at the European Union. I did multiple interviews. I continued to sell the idea that I had been horribly wronged by the discrimination in my life, but deep down, I knew that a victory had been hard won in a much larger battle. Alright, chapter 14 is called Privet Russia. I went out for dinner with my good friend Olivia last night, one of the few people I share the full mess of my life with until now, I guess. We've known each other for over a decade, and despite the chaos, she's always stayed in touch. We couldn't be more different, though. Olivia's the embodiment of normal, and I say that as a compliment. She's a mom of 3 who spends her days taking soft-lit family photos in wheat fields and hosting the kinds of get-togethers that only exist in Pinterest. Her Instagram is a highlight reel of church brunches, girls' luncheons, tape nights, and most recently a Shrek-themed Halloween party. She can make friends with anyone, an ability so foreign to me it might as well be a superpower. One of the funnier things she told me is that when I started ranting about my life's darker chapters, she basically detaches like I'm describing a fever dream. Lauren, I don't even know what a DOJ indictment is, she said. She meant DOJ, as in Department of Justice, but we now both permanently call it that dog indictment. What matters to her is loving me as a human being. The headlines, she couldn't care less. She's made it her mission to gently nudge me towards something resembling normalcy, as if we're living some 90s Chick-fil makeover. Except instead of being Anne Hathaway discovering she's secretly a princess and needs to live up to it, Olivia's pulling my hair with a hairbrush and zipping up some sheen top on me while begging me to act more feminine. Shoulders up, soft voice, don't start a debate. She took me out last night with her church group leaders to practice socializing. I'm aware of how pathetic that might sound, but it's not that I can't socialize. I think she just sees me slipping into more reclusive tendencies as the year goes by. I don't think solitude is as dysfunctional as people act like it is, though. Of course, so as long as you're actually alone and not just numbing out on social media. The couple who joined us for dinner were, in fact, the hosts of that Shrek-themed party. They were lovely, but at some point Russia came up. I laughed a little too hard. I didn't know where to or how to talk about it without sounding like I was losing it. I've seen what happens when people can't process bizarre life events. It hijacks every conversation. Just like weeks, a guy sat next to me in a cafe and within 4 sentences was telling me how his baby mom assaulted him and stole his sperm with a turkey blaster. It was 11 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was rattled. I really hope that's not how I sounded to Olivia's friends. Following the advice of my lawyers, I avoided discussing the current indictment. I dove into the past instead, how I traveled to Russia in 2018, met with high-level officials, and came away believing there was a covert operation influencing my work. I tried to compress the story into a few polite minutes, aware that it sounded outlandish. My half-assed retelling probably left everyone more confused than anything. I left realizing I've never really recounted the story in full. No one's ever asked, apart from a few journalists hoping it's more scandalous than it actually was. But for better or worse, I'm going to give it a try now. Let's rewind the clock in this very messy timeline to just before I got banned from the UK. I've been invited to speak at a Vlaams Belang event, a Flemish nationalist party in Belgium. I gave a speech on nationalism, standard fare for me at the time. I think it went well, hard to say. European political discourse tends to be more restrained, and my North American delivery probably came off more like a WWE match compared to their more subdued UFC-style seriousness. Why was I even there? Honestly, I couldn't tell you. Standing next to elected officials and career diplomats, I felt deeply unserious, just a YouTuber with a camera and a controversial opinion. But somehow, there I was. After the event, they graciously invited me for drinks in charcuterie. When I met a mix of political activists and donors, one member of parliament, Frank Crailman, approached me and handed over his card. I turned it over, noticing both English and Cyrillic lettering, intriguing to say the least. Frank, a middle-aged gentleman, spoke with calm and confidence. By then I pitched countless projects, cryptos, documentaries, trips, mostly by people with no real ability to deliver. Often the pitch itself was the point, just a way to stay in conversation with me, but Frank didn't give off that energy. If you ever want to come to Russia, he said, let me know. I can make it happen and get you access to high-level interviews. At this point in my life, I had traveled a significant portion of the globe, but Russia remained a massive question mark. It had that old world mystique, a place steeped in history, shallow in contradiction. I wasn't just curious about the country itself, but about the minds that made it run. Getting a visa wasn't easy, unlike most places. I didn't know a single person who could help. In Europe, I could post a tweet and have a driver or translator within an hour, But Europe, it felt like another internet entirety, more like China, closed off, enigmatic. Not long after our meeting, I received an email from Frank at my public address. I'm the guy that gave you the Russian business card at the Vlad's Beleng meeting yesterday. We didn't have time to speak. I don't know if you are still in the country and what is your program. If you still are, we might meet and have lunch or dinner somewhere to discuss some possibilities. I was senator and MP for 20 years, and as chairman to the Committee on Foreign Policy, European Affairs, and International Cooperation, I brought MPs of Vlaams Belang to Syria, Assad, Russia, Iraq. Now I am working on ending the sanctions against Russia and Syria and bringing businessmen over there. Conferences, TV shows, observation of elections. It needs no saying that I have contacts on a high level for a Flemish guy. As you seem to be interested in going to Russia, I might find you an invitation for speech or broadcast in Russia. Why not, for instance, with Youth Movement of United Russia? I responded, Hi Frank. I apologize for taking so long to respond to this email. Unfortunately, I was detained on my way to the United Kingdom and banned from the country. It became a whole situation that took up my week. It was lovely to meet you at the Vlangs Belaine event, though I'm very interested in discussing and doing some events in Russia. What did you have in mind exactly? Regards, Lauren S. We eventually started talking. I was offered several dates to visit the country, along with opportunities to meet some of the highest ranking officials in Russia, notably individuals like Dmitry Rogozin, the Director General of Roscosmos, Deputy Prime Minister in charge of the defense and space industries, and former Russian ambassador to NATO. More recently, he had served as the senator for the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia Oblast. There was also an invitation to speak with authorities in the Donbass region about the ongoing war there. Reading back these emails, I laughed because at one point I casually wrote, yeah, Donbass sounds fun. I'm super interested in the war going on there, as if I hadn't just googled the Donbass war a minute before responding. So I was hooked on the idea of visiting the world's most intense places, chasing adrenaline and novelty, and honestly what's more interesting than a war. I'd seen my share of rides by then, but I hadn't yet encountered tanks or missiles. Embarrassing isn't quite the right word, but looking back, I cringed at how easily the crumbling lives of others became bullet points on my personal bucket list. Disaster tourism of sorts. It took a while to get my Russian visa, including several trips to rather dodgy old embassy building in Toronto. I have no idea how they managed to transport Soviet-style visa center into modern-day Canada, but they did. Of course, I was the only one in the building who wasn't actually from Russia, so it stood out like a sore thumb. The old world wasn't just evident in Russia's politics or architecture, but in the personalities and mannerisms of the people who came from it. My visa looked like something straight out of a movie. I wore a black turtleneck and red lipstick for the photo, and the page is covered in Cyrillic, topped with a bold Russian Federation logo. Joe McCarthy would have given me life in prison for the optics alone. I traveled to Russia with my friend Brittany Pettibone, an author with a modest political YouTube channel at the time. She joined me for much of my travel across Europe, and I was really fond of her. She was kind, grounded, and made me feel safer navigating unfamiliar places. One-on-one dinners or interviews with men often veered into awkward or uncomfortable territory, and Brittany became a kind of buffer against that. But more than protection, after ages on the road together, we grew incredibly close. Brittany always meant well and generally tried to live by the principles she believed in. I admired that. There was a version of myself I saw reflected in her, someone more grounded and disciplined, that I quietly hoped I could grow into. We shared a lot of the same conservative values, but she lived them out far more consistently than I did. Up until then, I'd often been the one quietly disappointed by others, famous political figures who preached virtue but lived anything but. I think that's part of the reason I brought Brittany on my travels. She seemed rooted in something real. Ironically, now I was the one falling short. I was the one looking at her and thinking she should be the one in the spotlight, not me. Her one vice was smoking. I not only joined her, but found comfort in it. Not because I wanted her to have a flaw, but because it reminded me if she was human too. We found ourselves staying at the legendary Sovietsky, a hotel that seemed torn straight from the silver screen, an echo of another era. It was a monument to the USSR. I'll never forget stepping up to the massive marble stairs, adorned with Roman columns on either side, only to be met with the steely gaze of Joseph Stalin, a grand oil painting. The hotel was built on Stalin's orders to host Soviet VIPs, and it seemed that mission had never truly changed. I originally booked us into the Hotel USSR, a dive that was well within budget. Frank, however, had insisted we upgrade to the Sovietsky, and I was glad he did. Despite the stark contrast in quality, the pricing wasn't dissimilar when we were sent the links. Yet there was something uncanny about the place. The vibes were off from the start. The entire building felt suspended in time, empty but for us. Each morning, Brittany and I would make our way down to the lobby for breakfast, where a woman sat beside a grand golden harp, her fingers dancing over the strings in a melody for her audience of two. The banquet table was laden with food, enough to feed an army, but it was almost just us who dined. The bar was well stocked, the staff attentive, the kitchen perpetually open, yet the building hollow. I won't lie, we did scan the room for hidden cameras, half joking. One afternoon, we ran around exploring the halls, shouting just to hear our voices echo back, opening every unlocked door we could find. I flung one open and froze. Inside were a couple of men at a desk in a pitch-dark room, staring back at me over a glowing monitor. Huh? Inside were a couple of men at a desk in a pitch-dark room, staring back at me over a glowing monitor. I closed it fast, thinking I imagined it, but later I learned the hotel did in fact contain secret rooms built for surveillance. Okay, that's kind of okay. That's funny. I don't even want to imagine the conversations they might have recorded, or the fact that some guy might have been sitting behind a two-way mirror, watching me wrapped in a towel, plucking my eyebrows with mascara, smudged halfway down my face like a raccoon. For my, sanity's sake, I'm going to keep telling myself it was a fever dream. No, not for your sanity's sake. Whatever, dude. For your sanity's sake, come to the truth. Anyways, we had come to Moscow during Victory Day, May 9th. It was madness, unlike anything I've ever seen in the West. The cobblestone streets were buzzing with life, filled with people waving crimson Soviet flags. Children sported miniature Soviet caps, their eyes wide with the fervor of tradition, while men and women wore shirts featuring pictures of Stalin himself. Then came the silent parade. A sea of faces carrying framed photographs of lost family members or veterans long gone were in expressions of pride and grief. The atmosphere was so intense, so overwhelmingly powerful. I couldn't help but think there's no way this sort of thing could ever happen somewhere like Germany. Although both nations have committed grave mass murder, Russia is seemingly not ashamed of its past. Here in Moscow, pride burned as fiercely as the red banners fluttering in the wind, and in the shadow of the Sovietsky, I felt as if I had been transported to another world. A world where history was both celebrated and haunting, where every corner of the city told a story that refused to be forgotten. I interviewed people in Red Square about this, although I never released the footage. They explain that the past is complicated, but self-hatred and flagellation is not the answer to complex past. A large portion of people said they quite liked life under the Soviet Union. Others said they were glad it fell, but they could see the good. The way in which Russians interacted with the past was jarring compared to how we saw things in the West. I interviewed a high-ranking Gazprom oligarch, influential Russian media figures, and political activists, including the leader of Putin's youth party. But the interview we conducted with Alexander Dugin stood apart. It was the only one arranged myself, and I received a fair bit of criticism for it still. Still, I recommend watching it. Whatever your opinion of its views, it's generally fascinating to hear how Russian philosophers interpret concepts like democracy and liberalism. Dugin was often referred to as Putin's intellectual architect, the man behind the ideology that helped justify the war in Ukraine. He openly advocated for a unified Russian state, including the annexation of the Donbass. His daughter would later be murdered in a car bomb attack. Holy shit. Reportedly carried out by Ukrainian operatives in retaliation for Dugin's political beliefs and Russia's role in the war. No large-scale war or invasion had broken out yet when I visited in 2018. The conflict wasn't on any timelines or Apple News alerts. It was one of those distant, ongoing disputes in the region most people couldn't find on the map. But Frank wouldn't drop it. Lord, he insisted, this will be invaluable. We can get you military passes. You need to see what's really happening, the oppression of the Russian people in Donbass. At some point, the situation began to feel unnatural, almost forced. Most of the people I met were fascinating, thoughtful, and kind. I couldn't fault them personally, but the gifts I was receiving, combined with the pressure from Frank, made me wary. Something didn't sit right. There was a reason I had been brought here. There was a reason the Sovietsky was empty, and why I could secure full military access to the Donbass. This wasn't just a gesture of goodwill from Frank, it was a government operation. I had no concrete proof, but for once in my life, I decided to trust my gut. I refused to go to the Donbass, and the only interview I ended up publishing for this trip was the one arranged with Dugin, who had already been interviewed by journalists from across the political spectrum in the West. The others felt too controlled, too curated to serve a narrative. I couldn't in good faith present them as authentic encounters. To be candid, even with my suspicions of government involvement in my trip, I had not yet formed a definitive opinion about Russia. I genuinely enjoyed my time there, yet I had never felt so much like an outsider in my life. It felt as though everyone else was privy to some ongoing conversation script that I had never received. And in many ways, this was true. We had been educated on different histories, shaped by different truths. I could sympathize with their worldview, and knew on some level that I had been born there. Why have seen the world the same way? Once again, I fear we fall into the timeless trap of viewing our political military adversaries as illogical and evil instead of acknowledging that they operate from entirely different sets of information. This isn't an attempt to excuse any of their government's actions, least of all an invasion, and frankly, it's frustrating that such disclaimers feel necessary. We shouldn't have to preface every thought just to prove we aren't monsters. That reflex to over-explain, to soften, to disclaim before we speak, isn't just a distortion of language, it's a symptom of something deeper, a kind of spiritual erosion. The Russians I met noticed this instantly. They were fascinated and bewildered by how we spoke in the West, how we seemed to wrap even the simplest truth in layers of hesitation and apology. They couldn't understand why we spoke like we were always on trial. You all talk like you're afraid of being misunderstood. One interview subject told me, like you're not sure what you think until someone else approves it. He wasn't wrong. To them, it sounded like confusion, like a society slowly forgetting how to speak plainly or even think clearly. They saw our language as a mirror, one reflecting people who'd grown terrified of themselves, and in that mirror, I saw it too. That's the end of chapter 11. Sorry, that was the end of chapter 14. Damn, I'm on chapter 15. My head. I have a headache and it's dizzy, and my throat and my mouth is so dry I can barely keep talking. Chapter 15. Return to the 2016 slipstream. It's November 7th, 2024, and Donald Trump just won the presidential election. Honestly, I can't believe I'm writing that sentence. If you asked me even a week ago, I would have told you I didn't care who won. I'd intentionally distanced myself. I wasn't watching campaign ads, I wasn't tweeting about polls. My faith in political saviors had long eroded. Getting excited about an election again felt almost embarrassing, like falling for a scam I already warned others about. Bro, I felt that same way like back in these elections, right? 2024, 2020, 2016 actually I kind of wanted Trump to win because I thought it would be like all I saw in the news for like a whole year was just negative Trump coverage, and it was getting so annoyed by that. But yeah, after that I felt the same way. I really don't care. I expected it to be a fairly boring election week for me. Chores, writing, school drop-offs. I sent my son to an alternative school run by a Slavic family who fled the Soviet bloc. One of the things I love about the school is that their distrust of government institutions isn't the result of falling down an unhinged YouTube rabbit hole. It's rooted in real-life experience. Instead of ideology, they focus on teaching kids how to think, not what to think. My son climbs trees, bakes bread, sings songs, and learns that boys and girls can play together. He's not being raised to become some Amish, sex-segregated farmer, no offense to the Amish. It's not about being woke or anti-woke, it's just normal, healthy. The parents are also refreshingly grounded. Even if we don't all share the same politics, they've chosen a place that values nuance and critical thinking, which means they don't write me off on sight. A few have even told me they found some of my work thoughtful. That matters to me. I've always wanted my son to feel like he belongs, not like an outsider because of choices I made before he was born. The day before the election, I dropped my son off at school and climbed back into my Jeep. Just as I started the engine, one of the moms, Melody, pulled up beside me and called out, "What are you doing for election night? We're having a watch party at my place." It felt like the right moment to challenge my growing social anxiety creeping in. Back in the States, I had been invited to plenty of election night parties, but my lawyers warned me not to go unless I wanted to risk being detained by the FBI. So I was officially stuck at home. I was glad for the excuse to avoid the circus. I grabbed some wine and snacks and showed up, where I was greeted with warm, almost giddy enthusiasm. "Honestly, it's so odd to me that you're here, Lauren," Melody said. "I would have thought you'd be on some commentary panel or something." Her boyfriend, away in Alberta for work, was apparently a longtime follower of my Rebel Media days. I found her surprise oddly comforting. I assumed she knew why I couldn't travel, but she didn't seem aware of the indictment at all. I often feel like the world is watching everything I do, every high and every humiliating low. I know that sounds self-centered. The usual advice is, relax, no one's paying that much attention to you, but that doesn't really apply when you're a public figure, even a mid-tier internet one. The moment I start to believe no one's watching, someone at church or the grocery store will shake my hand either to offer sympathy for whatever disaster I'm apparently going through, or to thank me for my heroic work. It's like I've got this continuous storyline in my head, but everyone around me is at a different point in my story. They approach me to shake my hand, I have no idea who they're addressing, the 19-year-old me, the divorced me, the indictment me, or the Farmlands documentary me. Whatever video they last watched is what they expect to see in front of them, and half of the time I'm tempted to show up as whatever version they've ordered. But that night, no one made me do that, and without any cameras around, I had no pressure to be anything other than my somewhat politically ambivalent self. Melody and I stayed up late watching the results and actually got to know each other. She works in a fairly progressive field and was frustrated by the lack of political nuance, how everyone's expected to fall in line without thinking. She offered me a smoke, and we got chatting about marriage, religion, and culture. Our views didn't always align, but a decade ago, I don't think either of us would have been pegged as conservative, more like middle of the road. It's funny, in real life, despite my reputation, I'm usually seen as the more liberal one. Melody was way more hyped about a possible Trump win than I was. Turns out, being treated like dirt by the so-called liberals in your own industry for years can shift your politics. She had a million stories from the COVID era, ones most of us have. getting screamed at to put on a mask only to take it off 8 steps later at the table. That kind of petty performative control wears people down, especially when life is already grinding them to the bone. During COVID, I had my own maddening run-ins with the government. I was flying between Australia and Canada to visit family, often routing through Los Angeles. Unfortunately, an activist working at the Seattle airport had flagged me years earlier, and another agent eventually confirmed it. I ended up on some kind of watch list. Different people at the border seemed to be working at cross purposes. Some put me on lists, others quietly warned me about it. It felt like a war inside the system, driven more by ideology than security. I wondered if Americans were starting to feel the same way Canadians had after the lockdowns. Once COVID hit, that screening turned to a full-on travel ban despite my having left politics to pursue family. I lost over 10 grand in flights and spent hours being interrogated. During one 8-hour session, my infant son crawled on the detention room floor while I begged a border agent to let me reunite with my loved ones. The only reason the ban was eventually lifted was because a contact I had within the Trump administration made a few calls. It vanished overnight. Yes, that's political favoritism, and no, it shouldn't be how things work, but the truth is, I never should have been banned in the first place. These systems are not just about national security, they're used to silence, punish, and obstruct. And if your friends don't have power, you're at the mercy of those who do. For years, especially after Trump left office, I got used to having no allies. I lived with quiet reality that no one in power seemed to care whether I sank or swam, but becoming a parent changed my politics. It's no longer about grand ideals, it's about giving my son a decent life. Watching him crawl across the floor of a detention room while I was barred from travel wasn't the future I imagined. Not to mention, more recently, being smeared as a Russian agent, harassed by the Canadian government, and unable to provide for my child, stripped life down to its essentials. I just want to be a mother. At this point, red, blue, green, or purple, I'd vote for anyone who made it easier to just make my son pancakes in the morning. I'm not asking for utopia, just a kitchen, a spatula, and maybe a brief window where no one accuses me of espionage. I don't want much from the government, just to be left alone. I can say with absolute certainty that every dime spent on surveilling and harassing me over the years has been a complete and utter waste. I think everyone involved in this knew it as well. If they didn't, that's even worse. It's just a level of incompetence that feels fall of empire level. But I agree, dude. I feel like there's so many things nowadays that people just go to jobs, they just do their work just for the sake of doing the work, and the work they do is not even meaningful at all. It's pointless. Although they still get paid for it. I don't care much for politicians anymore, Trump included. I'd say that obsessive fanaticism towards them on either side baffles me, but there was a time I joined in on the fanaticism too. I wore the red hat, lined up at rallies, waved flags like I was cheering for a sports team. I saw a tweet recently that called elections the Super Bowl for people on the spectrum. It made me chuckle. All of this was swirling in my head as TV analysts ranted about vote count and projections, while Melody brought out another charcuterie board, and the kids laughed and screamed downstairs. Up here in Canada, the government has started restricting access to American news. Facebook, Instagram, even YouTube are censoring posts, and if you try to stream CNN live, you get content not available in your region. So begrudgingly, our watch party tune into the CBC, our state-funded broadcaster. The TV droned on in the background while we talked about everything but the election. Hours passed, so I kept glancing at the screen, watching the slow creep of red across the map. I'd seen this movie before. It was getting late, the kids were asleep, everyone else had gone home, just Melody and me picking at the last bits of the charcuterie where the number flashed on the screen. 270, Trump had won, there was no wait. Did Trump just win? Lauren, did Trump just win the election? Melody looked at me, waiting for some confirmation. I couldn't bring myself to believe it. Yeah, you need 270 electoral votes to win the election. Just give me a minute, though. I had to scroll through 20 verified news sources confirming Trump presidency before it sank in. He won. He actually won. My ambivalence dissolved in a rush of emotion I hadn't felt in years. I could have cried, almost did. I screamed. Melody screamed, though for very different reasons. We hugged and jumped around, pacing back and forth. We poured wine and toasted. We called our loved ones. We laughed. I went to bed happy. I woke up happy. I felt as though a world possibly had opened up again. I feel free again. All right, now here's the weird thing, because I thought Lauren just said that she doesn't really care about politics. Like she said she didn't care who won, but I guess deep down she really did want Trump to win, huh? Yo, all right, let me just pause this. All right, so I took a quick break from reading. I just want to say I just saw this deal here. It is 104 Funyuns for $20. And it's from the Funyuns in Amazon, so that's crazy. I might buy it. Alright, anyways, back to reading. Alright, let's see. I know some of my readers hate Trump, not just dislike, hate. Some see him as a downfall of Western civilization, others view him as a felon who tried to overthrow the US government. You might be wondering how someone like me, who has faced deep disillusionment within the right wing world, could respond to his win this way. It's a fair question. In truth, it had little to do with anything ideological. It wasn't just the travel troubles of my past that were resolved by the Trump administration. Once again, I found myself in a position where the outcome of the election would shape my future, not politically, but personally. The future of my family. Until that night, I mostly accepted that the Canadian government would keep making my life hell for simply contributing to tenant media. But with Trump back in office, I have this gut feeling that I'll be fine. Power has shifted, and the eye of Sauron is turning in new directions. That doesn't mean everything in the world will be okay. It's still the eye of Sauron, but at least I'll live to fight another day. I hate to admit it, but I was on the verge of cooperating with the feds. My initial response to their first visit was a firm, not interested, don't care, do what you want, and fuck off. They didn't take the hint. The call started soon after, dozens from an unknown number. I ignored everyone, dodging them between waving to other parents at school drop-off, pretending all was fine. Need to get that? They'd ask. Nope. Eventually I asked my sister to call the number just to see who it was. No answer, no voicemail. I blocked it. A few days later, my gym rang. Lauren, do you have a stalker? Some guy named Jason's asking about you. Maybe an ex? I was sufficiently creeped out. Then came the signal request, one after another, all marked missed call, then the messages. I have something important to discuss. Please give me a call back. Thanks, Jason. An hour later, we spoke a month ago in front of your rental. I replied bluntly, I don't know anyone named Jason. He replied, we had a discussion on your patio a month ago. It finally clicked. It was the feds. I hesitated, but eventually picked up. He said he had something extremely important to tell me. Just one more meeting, for my own good. A warning, he said. At the time, I wasn't fully aware that this kind of anxiety-inducing pressure was part of their intimidation interrogation tactics. I only started to understand it better later, as I did more research into the methods used in these situations. Bro, you know what? I feel like a red flag is for anybody that tries to talk to you, whether it's a business relationship, a random friendship, or like anyone that tries to like communicate with you. If they try to do something that like tries to make you feel like, oh, if you don't do this and this something's bad, like this is gonna happen, and they're basically gonna bring you down. They've revealed an intention that they're capable of just bringing you down. You know, of like destroying you, or not just like basically harm you or bring something negative upon you if they don't get their way. That right there, the fact that they even thought about that means that they probably had that done that before, right? It could be a habit of theirs. That to me is a red flag that something's gonna go wrong. Like there's that sort of, they have like an ulterior motive, right? The thing that they're telling you right now is more for their own benefit instead of for yours. Jason came to my house again. We went for a walk in the woods. The more he spoke to me, the more my anxiety and fear grew. I suppose that's their job, getting under your skin. He did it well. Everyone else is working with the feds, except you, Lauren, he began. You're the only one not talking. Do you have any idea how that makes you look? We know exactly how it makes you look, and the others are throwing you under the bus. Don't you want your side of the story to be heard? Your friends are giving us information. It's not going to end well for you if you keep silent. Honestly, I'm just trying to help you here. I had the single mother too, and your son needs you. I hate to see something happen to you, something that could keep you from being there for him. After a walk that morning, he showed up again that night. Down at the beach, the sky was clear, the moon slicing the ocean in two with its reflection. He called it a final opportunity to cooperate. If I didn't cave, he said his hands would be tied. I smoked at least 10 cigarettes under the moonlight while he sat on a driftwood bench, tugging at emotional strings, watching my nerves fray. I didn't care. Of course I was anxious. Why bother pretending I wasn't? That didn't mean I was going to change my mind. A funny thing though, for all his talk about last chances, they just kept coming. I was getting less convinced by the minute. He told me one thing they were certain of. I'd never be able to visit America again. The FBI would take me in, and my travel privileges would be stripped entirely. I don't give a shit, I snapped. I never want to leave home again. I don't think you people understand my motivations. Jason kept pressing. What if your son marries a nice American girl? What if he goes to university there? You'd be separated from him. Surely there'll be important reasons to go to America in your future. At that point, I wasn't even sure what I was nervous about, but there were too many pressures to count. But one thing was obvious. America was their last leverage. When he told everyone I knew was turning on me, feeding them intel, I just laughed. If they had anything solid, I would have felt it by now, and as of yesterday, their ace was gone.
With the new administration, I'm confident my travel situation will be resolved. Power has shifted. The direction has changed. It doesn't mean everything's fine, but maybe I will speak. I'm not out of this yet. My testimony is coming. A lot could happen between now and then, but for once, I feel a little steadier. I think I can really speak my mind when the time comes. As for America, I have no idea what Trump has in store there. I don't see heroes, just theater. Whoever won, the direction of power itself is what's most worrisome. In an era of techno-fascism, algorithmic control, data and digital systems instead of brute force, arriving quietly as a convenience, curated feeds shaping beliefs, social media rewarding performance over thought, choices that feel free but are tightly managed by those who benefit from division. No one's immune, not even me. I hope the truth can survive it. Chapter 16, Borderless. Come mid-2018, I was deeply sick of politics. Same here, bro. It's at 2018, same. It's never ending. I'm gonna pause here for a bit. Alright, let's keep going. I was on tour with Steph. After Russia, I went to Australia that July on a speaking tour. Going to Australia felt like being famous in Japan. For some reason, that country couldn't get enough of me. I was on tour with Stephen Molyneux, but if you follow much of the news, you wouldn't know that. They needed the blonde girl front and center in every major newspaper. Cal and I decided to snap a photo of me wearing an "It's Okay to Be White" shirt as I walked out of the airport after my arrival, then sold it to the press like we were paparazzi. They immediately published it. We were winning at outrage marketing, and yet we shouldn't have. Literally all the news had to do was not get upset over obvious bait. Of course, it's okay to be white. People can help what skin color they're born with. Getting mad about this was foolishness, and everyone knew it. As a result of our stunt, the shows sold out across the country. Wow, professional rage bait, huh? Okay. We were on every major news channel, had a full security detail, and even got the celebrity treatment with our drivers arriving on the tarmac to pick us up. Eventually, I started being followed around by actual paparazzi. It was absolutely bizarre. But even with all of this, I still wanted to quit politics. I saw this as my big break before I'd finally leave for good. Then again, I had made a lot of failed plans to leave over the years. It was my thing. I bounced back and forth between desperately wanting to get my life back and this intrinsic fear that I could never do it, and that this was all I was good for. This time, the deal to stay was just a little more money, Lauren. I needed some cash to give myself a nest egg for whatever came next. This tour would be perfect. I was set to make about $50,000 off of it. I wasn't particularly wealthy because I had spent all my money making content, so that kind of money would have been life-changing. The tour ended up making $500,000. The men running it stole all of it, or they didn't budget properly, or it went up their noses. It didn't matter. I wasn't getting paid either way, and I was devastated. My mom was with me when they told us the money was gone. But we still had 2 shows left, and of course we did them anyway. I cried. I know it might seem silly to complain about being a celebrity for a month in a foreign country. Wow, what tragic problems, Lauren, but I'm being serious. I've worked fast food, washed dishes for banquets, worked at kids' camps, cleaned stables, and worked retail during the holiday season. It was a different kind of difficulty, both physical and psychological. I had never worked so hard in my life. Sleepless nights, no peace, no privacy. Planes every other day, TV shows, critics, paparazzi, book signs until 2 in the morning. Damn, she got scammed basically. Alright, so for one, I guess it's a little bit weird, doing stuff like that with people you barely trust, because I guess then once they see a whole bunch of money, they can't help but take it. So these people who con her out and got all the money. Damn. Okay. I could never do it again. I got a small taste of extreme fame. It was suffocating for my soul. People shouldn't live out of hotel rooms. People shouldn't shake hands with thousands of people every week who treat them like gods. While everyone I met was very kind, that sort of exposure messes with your head. You become a shell of a human being, performing everywhere you go, not really living, no time for introspection. I had already given up so much of myself to the internet, and the idea of fully integrating every part of me into that all-encompassing fame terrified me. The thought of spending more time around the scam artists and criminals of politics was intolerable. My heart couldn't take it anymore. The tour solidified my decision to walk away, but paradoxically, it also pulled me in deeper. The theme was something along the lines of "the West is the best," and the backlash was intense. Protesters tried to get venues shut down, riots broke out that blocked highways, and headlines branded me a fascist. Not because anyone believed that, but because it sold. They didn't even get my name right. I was called Laura Southern by reporters who made wild declarations about my character more often than I can count. In the wake of all of these headlines, the questions that had been haunting me became impossible to ignore. How the hell was I supposed to return to any kind of normal life after this? Who would hire me? And if I stayed, how could I do it without selling my soul to the endless cycle of lies, outrage, and performance? Maybe, if nothing else, I could try to hold myself to a higher standard. I tried. I published a video called A New Direction, where I told my audience that I have never expected my life to spiral this way and that most of the critiques I once made about modernity had become the tired, repetitive noise of the internet. What I was really saying was, I cannot believe everyone is still watching this shit. How many videos can people really watch that just repeatedly say feminist dumb or liberal own? It was incomprehensible, draining all creativity from me. Repeating myself on these topics feels unnatural and forced, I said. I don't want to do this just for clicks or to stay relevant or make money. The entire political sphere has become toxic and unnatural. Looking back, it's kind of eerie how clear-headed I was in those moments, but how I still didn't succeed in getting out. I wish I could have gone back and let myself know, actually, it is possible to dig the hole deeper, Lauren. I kept making bargains with myself. I finished the video by announcing I'd be shifting to solely documentary creation. In Australia, it was just a little more money, then it became I'll pivot to documentaries. That will be healthier. I didn't want to face the truth of how deeply I've been shaped by the industry, how unhealthy my experiences have been. I wanted to keep up the charade, just in a way that allowed me to isolate myself from the constant scrutiny and need to appease the internet. Borderless was a bold idea for a film. Typically, Cal and George and I brainstorm concepts informally, never in business meetings. We'd be sitting in some airport bar and casually say, hey, let's make a movie about all the migrants coming into Europe. The next day, we have a poster made, and within a week, we'd be filming. The way I pushed myself into action was simple. Once we had an idea, I booked the flights. South Africa, New York, Vienna, wherever we needed to be the next day. No second guessing. By the time I woke up, my new mission was clear. Shit, I have to be at the airport in 5 hours to start Borderless. Better start packing. Type A people fear me. For most of my life, I've downplayed the things I've seen and done, partly for psychological survival, partly out of habit. I've been on a nuclear dose of it is what it is for a decade, so if I came off aloof while recounting certain moments, it's not for effect. It's taken me years to realize how insane some of those experiences actually were. Case in point, a week ago, I was watching Inventing Anna on Netflix. You don't need the whole plot, just know there's a scene where the main character gets stuck in Morocco, unable to pay an astronomical hotel bill. Things spiral, police are threatened, security closes in. Everyone looks like they might get thrown in jail, or worse. My stomach nodded, then just as quickly, I had a flashback to my own time in Morocco. I don't talk about much, but it's vivid. I remember a man's face smashed repeatedly into the white bars of a detention center. Blood, screaming. A woman sobbing over a young man limp on the ground, and right in front of me, laws on the wall about blasphemy. My phone was tucked at my side, hidden, as I pulled up the consequences for violation. Punishable by 6 months to 3 years in prison. Great. In a tiny detention office, the man holding my passport held up a video of me from Australia, one where I'm ranting about Sharia law creeping into the West. He shows it to his colleague, both of them casting wide-eyed glances in my direction. I start to wonder what might happen if they find my fuck Islam makeup tutorial. Meanwhile, my fixer is in a heated argument down the hallway with what seems to be the head official. He'd accidentally let slip that I was a journalist when we crossed the border. To be clear, the Ceuta land crossing we chose wasn't exactly on the tourist trail. The terrain is all dust and rust, migrants hide in engines, nearly suffocating for a shot at entering Spain. The other side feels like a different century altogether. By some miracle, the head officer ignored the men frantically, googling me, trying to show him who I was. He waved them off and flashed a grin at my translator, then turned to me and handed back my passport. Out of the corner of my eye, I still caught glimpses of the man being beaten. The world seemed to slip in slow motion as the officer spoke the words, "Welcome to Morocco," in broken English. Our film crew had entered the country in separate groups in case of any of us were rejected, leaving only my translator and me stranded at the border. When we finally stepped past the barrier, a gust of wind swept through the streets. Cars rattled forward, and nearly every man turned to stare at me and at my tank top. A teenage boy hurriedly clapped his hands over his younger brother's eyes. Our first stop. What the hell is Morocco? Why is they acting like this? Is it like super religious and conservative that way? That you're not allowed to like show cleavage or something? Morocco. I spelled it right. I did. Okay. Is in North Africa, okay. Islam is both official and predominant religion. Okay, so it's over there, huh? Since okay. Okay, so ethnic group, foreign languages spoken, mostly Arabic, right? Alright, so yeah, definitely. Okay, pretty much everyone there is Islamic then, huh? Okay, that makes more sense. I guess that means the women there must be wearing like burqas, and yeah, and that's sorry. So she's She's wearing everything. Whatever. Okay. Our first stop was to buy me a headscarf. Next, on to the Moroccan mountains to speak with human traffickers. Less than a year after 2 Danish girls were beheaded after unintentionally running into the very camps we were sent out to find in the mountains ourselves. Sitting on my couch watching Inventing Anna, the credit card fiasco hit differently. Amex stepped in. No one was detained, yet there it was, stretching to multiple high-budget Netflix episodes. I wasn't rolling my eyes, it was good TV, but as the tension built around the threat of jail, I felt a weird sense of recognition. I lived through something similar and barely acknowledged it since. It made me realize how much I've muted the volume on my own past. Borderless filming was a whirlwind, chaotic, life-threatening, and utterly reckless. It could easily be its own book. Our goal was to capture every side of the story: activists opposing immigration, politicians, NGOs, migrants, even human traffickers. We succeeded in interviewing them all, but not without a fair share of close calls and failures. As usual, the funniest and most interesting parts of the movie never even made it on screen. Perhaps my favorite story, though favorite might not be the right word because honestly, I don't even know what the right word is, was my trip to northern Finland, a detour that could have been its own Tiger King style spin-off season. Was it necessary to go to the Arctic Circle for this film? Absolutely not. But did I end up there anyways because of a series of last-minute Solpaden-fueled airport business meetings? Yup. There were a few moments in my career when we destroyed all the footage, every last damn bit, burned the hard drives. It was nobody can ever find out we were in the vicinity of this place kind of stuff. This was one of them. So how did we even end up there? Well, I thought it would be a good idea to interview Generation Identitaire for the Borderless film as our migration opposition activists. However, earlier that year, I had been with Brittany Pettibone and her future husband, an activist for the group, sitting in an Austrian McDonald's, working on some projects. When I noticed her husband had left, time passed, and eventually, when we went outside, Austrian undercover authorities approached me and let me know he had actually been arrested. I hadn't even noticed it. He was just whisked away. What followed was an intense court battle where all devices were seized, homes searched, and rights stripped away, while he was investigated for forming a criminal organization. The court later ruled he was innocent. Okay. These court battles dragged on, and Callan didn't feel it was the right time to interview the group. He went to find a less extreme activist organization for the film, something that wasn't considered far right. He told me he found one in Finland and thought that aesthetics would look good. I was skeptical, honestly didn't feel like going all the way to Finland. This was near the end of the borderless trip, and we had already spent a significant amount of time talking with people in migrant camps. I don't think people realize how much disease spread in these places. I visited countless campsites, tents, and cramped spaces for interviews, sitting on their floors and beds with my crew. My one regret, not buying higher socks. I started developing a rash on my ankles, which were exposed between my bloodstones and skinny jeans. Turns out I had caught scabies there from sitting on rugs and blankets. It was incredibly itchy and I couldn't sleep. Alright, I just gotta do some research. What is scabies? Why is my mouth so fucking hard to type? Microscopic mice. Oh shit. Okay, damn. Okay. It was incredibly itchy and I couldn't sleep. The worst part was having to go buy medication for crabs. I worked for scabies too. I kept assuring the shop owners it was for my ankles, but they just rolled their eyes and said, uh-huh. When we weren't filming, I spent my time soaking my feet in hot baths to soothe the pain and itching, slathering the medication on my legs. This was after a brutal 2-week bout of near-death level food poisoning from Spain. I'll never forget dragging myself to a hospital in Bulgaria only to find 2 nurses chain-smoking in the triage office, the whole room thick with smoke as I thought to myself, yep, I'm going to die. I couldn't have found myself in a worse situation. When I landed in Helsinki, where there were only 3 hours of daylight, the air was freezing and I was in constant pain. The next day, we had a meeting with Andre, the head of PR for the group Colin had found. Beforehand, we went to McDonald's, literally the only thing I planned to eat after my food poisoning. I was even more depressed by how healthy all the options at European McDonald's were. I just wanted some sunlight and something greasy. We finally made our way to the meeting at a cafe down the road from our hotel. During the 5 seconds of daylight, Helsinki would have. As soon as I saw the woman and man who met us wearing branded jackets, I immediately recognized their aesthetic as biker gang adjacent. I looked at Callum, who didn't seem to get it. Did they not have bikers in London? They were friendly though, and we asked about their views on migration, what their goals were for the interview. They told us they felt the numbers were too extreme, that Europe needed proper border controls to protect the original cultures of these countries. Despite their appearance, their comments seemed fairly moderate. Great, I said. When should we do the interview and where? There was a pause, and Andre, who we learned had flown in from Malta, chimed in. The leaders of our group are up north. Up north, I thought. Yes, in Lapland, Andre clarified. I looked up the city he gave us on Google Maps and nearly had an aneurysm. Nearly 10 hours drive. Seeing my displeased look, Andre quickly tried to push things along. We'll leave tomorrow morning. You can follow our car, and many of our members would like to meet you along the way. We have clubhouses in every town on the way up. Clubhouses, what have we gotten ourselves into? Callan, all smiles and charm, eagerly agreed, while my eyes burned holes into him. But the decision was made, so we went back to our hotel to prepare for the next day. The next morning, we got in the rental car and began the grueling drive up north. While I was generally pissed the entire time I was in Finland because, well, I was in Finland, I will give it this, the scenery is stunning. It reminded me of Canada in winter, and you could film a Hollywood movie where a man bleeds to death in the snow at just about every other intersection. A few hours up north, we made our first stop. Andre let us know a clubhouse was coming up, and though I still didn't understand what the hell he meant by clubhouse. We drove through a barren landscape of snow, over some train tracks, and out to an abandoned factory building. It looked like something out of a Quentin Tarantino. Okay. Lauren keeps mentioning these references to like this movie, that movie. I don't know a single one of them. Not a single one. I guess it's the generation gap. Or either that or she read a tutorial on how to depict scenery or depict the landscape and she chose this route for some reason. I'm gonna pause a bit. We drove through a barren landscape of snow. I forgot to turn this on. Of snow, over some train tracks, and out to an abandoned factory building. It looked like something out of a Quentin Tarantino movie. This huge, desolate structure with one tiny door, a flickering sign above it featuring their group's logo, all complemented by the foggy winter air and dreary skies. No one in their right mind would have gone through that door. Kyle and I weren't sure we had a choice. If we refused it, it would be seen as disrespectful and we'd probably lose our guides. We entered the factory building, which was eerily silent. Walking up the metal stairs, the platforms beneath our feet banged and echoed through the metal stairs. The platforms beneath our feet banged and echoed through the space. We eventually reached the door that led into a room, which frankly did look like a clubhouse, just not a political one. A group of men and one woman in leather jackets turned and acknowledged our arrival with smiles and nods. We needed a translator for most of what they said, but there was something off about the place. It was clear that a good bit of money had been spent on a minibar and decorating with posters, jackets, and stickers. But in the middle of a room, a massive wooden table had been smashed to bits, with windows and other ornaments also damaged. Andre spoke up. Yes, they say the clubhouse was attacked recently by their enemies. It happens sometimes. It was a proper fight, though, and they ran them off. Enemies? I'm sorry, what? It hit me then. We might have found ourselves in the middle of something familiar, gang wars turned political activism. When we got back in the car, Cal and I sat shivering, and as I turned the key in the ignition, we could see our breath in the cold air. Silence settled between us as the engine sputtered to life, and we exchanged a look. I can't remember who spoke first, but one of us hesitantly muttered, "Did you see that sticker in the corner?" "Oh yeah, I saw it," the other responded. We were talking about a giant double Thunderbolt sticker by the minibar. Given our time on the internet, we both knew exactly what it represented. The SS, as in Hitler's SS. I looked at Callan with a grim sort of schadenfreude. "Oh yeah, let's go to Finland. They're too extreme in Austria, right?" I joked. Callan laughed, but we both concluded that it was probably nothing, just one weird sticker. Maybe the leaders up in Lapland were a different sort from the disjointed group in those clubhouses hours out. By the time we reached the next clubhouse, our concerns had grown. This one was a large farm compound, complete with a sauna, of course. The one who ran it bred German shepherds, lots of them. The clubhouses themselves were nice, I'll give them that. Callan found a book filled with black and white photography and struck up a conversation with her about it. He was always friendly, no matter how bizarre the situation. As we walked back to the car, Callan slammed the door shut and looked at me. "Lauren, did you see the book?" "The book?" "Yeah, the book, full of very interesting tattoos. Very interesting tattoos." Whenever things got weird on our trips, Cal and I would disassociate by making up absurd stories about what was happening around us. It became one of our favorite coping mechanisms. On the rest of the 14-hour drive, after all the stops, we bounced silly movies, plots back and forth, imagining ourselves in Finland as a film. Each of us piling up on more ridiculous details about the circumstances and the characters we encountered until we were both howling with laughter. When we finally reached Lapland, a faint ray of the northern lights streaked across the sky. I kept squinting, hoping they'd get brighter as we rode into town. It was late, and we were both exhausted, eager to get to our Airbnb and crash. Andre insisted we come into the leadership headquarters first, as everyone had gathered in anticipation of meeting us. Now, it's important to note that this was actually Andre's first time visiting these headquarters himself, being from Malta and all. When we stepped out of the cars, the first thing we noticed was a large manufactured home with bullet holes in the windows. Bullet holes were also scattered across the cars parked outside. I cleared my throat and asked politely, "Something happened here." The local guide, staying with Andre, casually chimed in, "Oh yes, just another enemy attack a week or so ago." I exchanged a look with Callan. We locked eyes in a silent, "What the fuck?" We walked around to the entrance and up the wooden stairs to a doorway. Nothing we had just seen or even imagined our silly movie plot adventures could prepare us for what came next. Andre opened the door to the headquarters. Hitler. Adolf Hitler everywhere. I went into tunnel vision. My gaze was immediately drawn to a massive portrait of the Fuhrer on the far wall. My eyes darted around a mannequin in full Nazi uniform, a gigantic red swastika flag, and then another and another. We were surrounded, lightning bolts on the ceiling, death skulls, a 1488 floor mat, black leather jackets, tattoos galore. I think I heard Callan actively die beside me. He has spent so much of his life on these trips pretending not to be a gay liberal, but today, I think he had finally met his match. We had driven all the way to the Arctic Circle just to find the first genuine neo-Nazis I had ever encountered in my life. I could have laughed if I weren't so deeply concerned for our safety. A group of men, covered in Nazi tattoos from head to toe, were sitting at a bar drinking what seemed to be homemade liquor. They gave us a tour of the place, showing off their prized sauna room. Everything had been funded by donations to the group, which had factions all over North America. Huh? Okay. Many of which likely had no idea what their headquarters looked like. I assure you, they did not advertise these views publicly. When they invited us to join them for a sauna, Colin and I very firmly but very politely declined. The men invited me over to the bar and started going off about their hate for words I can't repeat here. Now I'm sure some of you reading this will fancy yourselves as heroes thinking, I would have said something. Sure, buddy, but unless you found yourself in an actual neo-Nazi bar in the Arctic Circle with bullet holes in the walls and surrounded by skinheads, I really don't want to hear it. So I smiled and nodded politely, repeatedly turning down drinks, all the while scheming for Callan to figure out how we could get the hell out of there. It seemed like he'd pull off into the sauna locker room by Andre, though. Apparently, Andre was panicking a bit. As the PR guy, he wasn't quite sure how to handle the situation. He was practically begging Callan, asking him not to portray the group as Nazi adjacent. As Callan tells it, he looked at Andre, pointing to a swastika on the wall, and said, "Well, this is a little naughty, isn't it?" I never found out how the rest of that conversation went, and to be honest, I barely knew how my own conversations were going either. The language barrier between the group leadership and me was significant. Still, we eventually managed to convey through Andre that we desperately needed to sleep and politely said our goodbyes, letting them know we'd seen them in the morning. Callan and I screamed the entire way back to the Airbnb. After hours of arguing, we couldn't decide whether we should just speed off or do the interviews and never publish them. Logistically, we were terrified of offending a group like this, especially given the what appeared to be biker gang friends they had located throughout the day-long drive back to Helsinki. If we didn't do the interviews, what would happen? Would they come after us? Alright, there's no way this is real. There's no way. How do you spell? Helsinki? In Finland. Finland biker gang. (2015), is that right? The hell? Okay. Okay. We finally agreed that we'd film the interviews but not hit record. The footage we had so far, gone, deleted, never existed. Into the void it went. We already had enough journalists slandering us as Nazis without having pictures and videos with actual Nazis to boot. It was about the last thing I needed, especially when I was desperately trying to shift from one-sided activism to more nuanced investigative work. It was going splendidly, as you can see. The next day, we returned to conduct the interviews. Honestly, it felt like we were trapped in an SNL skit or an Onion article. Looking back, I wish we still had the footage, as no one is going to believe this. I was interviewing one of the leaders who had a 1488 tattoo on his knuckles and swastika earrings, right in front of a massive Hitler poster. I thought about the absurd question Andre had asked Colin in the sauna room. I don't know what possessed me, but I just couldn't resist. Deadpan, I blurted out, "What would you say to members of the media who might describe your group as a radical Nazi organization?" I wasn't sure what I expected the answer to be, but it definitely wasn't the one I got. This guy, without even flinching, looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You know the mainstream media, they're always lying, trying to slander good people like us just for criticizing immigration." What the? Huh? I had nothing. I literally had nothing. I asked a few more generic questions, and Cal and I quickly started packing up our equipment, all while muttering our thanks and goodbyes. "That's all we need, thank you." Andre seemed relieved, but the group's leaders weren't having it. They immediately demanded we stay longer. "Not yet. Wait, we need to show you something. We need to show you the problem in the town," they insisted. They took us on a drive to show us black people. Honestly, I still can't fathom why these migrants went all the way to fucking Lapland full of neo-Nazis. Oh, come on, bro, I got... What is Lapland? Lapland is in Finland. Bro, it's in Finland. What? It's a beautiful place though, much of snow. We tried to figure out if these minorities were causing problems in the area, to which they confidently replied, "Oh no, they would never, we've made sure of that." I didn't even want to ask what a preemptive correction meant. Eventually, we found a socially acceptable way to get the hell out of Lapland. Not before they gave us parting gifts. However, a fat stack of bumper stickers depicting what I can only describe as slavery-era American racial propaganda. I'm talking black people drawn as monkeys being clubbed to death. Wow, thanks! I'm totally going to slap this on my car when I get home. They also insisted on taking a picture with me. Somewhere out there in the ether, there's the picture of me with a group of neo-Nazis in the North Pole. I had no idea how I explained that if it ever got out. By that point, I honestly didn't care. We practically ran to the car, throwing our bags in. I'd never driven so fast in my life. Callan held the stickers in front of him, staring wide-eyed, alternating between gasping, screaming, and manic laughter. The snow was coming down, visibility was low, and I was swerving my way back like I was in a Formula One race. Halfway to Helsinki, we got pulled over by the police and I was slapped with a hefty ticket. I never paid it, and so probably can't return to Finland because of it, but honestly, I don't care. I have zero desire to go back. The less radical organization, huh? I quipped at Callan. I wasn't even mad anymore. We both laughed, just happy we got out. I'd never let him live it down. We didn't stay long enough to hear their full stories, but even in the madness, tattoos, clubhouses, and paranoia, I sometimes wonder who they were before all of this. Because human beings aren't born with swastikas on their walls, something takes them there. The rest of the borderless filming was filled with stories like this, ridiculous moments, most of which never made it into the final cut. If you think the film was massively biased, I actually recommend giving it a watch. Ironically, I was semi-cancelled by the more radical factions of my audience for showing too much sympathy for everyone involved. I was growing up a little, experiencing evolution of thought and feeling at this time, and that's the deeper story here. Most of what's real, what was actually happening in the world, never made it on the screen. It was left on the cutting room floor, if ever filmed or told at all. Speaking of, there is one more story, one pivotal moment in my life that this book wouldn't be complete without. That's the story of my time in Turkey, and that leads us to chapter 17. Let's stop here for now.
Alright, I shall now continue from chapter 17, Midnight Express. We had just filming in Greece, on the island of Lesbos. It was a waiting ground for largely economic migrants, though some genuine refugees hoped that gaining a foothold in Europe would be their salvation. They would arrive by boat, occasionally even by jet ski from the nearby Turkish coast, tossing their life jackets into a mountain of thousands that sat on the beaches of Lesbos. The next stop was the Moria camp, where they hoped to be processed and moved to Athens. Few realized that they would be stuck in this purgatory for years. Moria camp was a nightmare. People fought over food, dealt drugs, crime was rampant. There were stabbings, and a deep anger toward Europe began to fester among the population. Human traffickers in Turkey had promised them a trip to paradise, but for many it became a one-way ticket to a hellish existence. In some cases, people who had been living peacefully in Turkey for years paid thousands of dollars unknowingly trading their lives for a permanent stay in that wretched camp. Not long after we finished filming Mean Borderless, the migrants burned Moria to the ground. I don't blame them. Holy crap, what is that? Let me do some searching real quick. Moria. Moria camp, sorry. Moria refugee camp. Alright, so this is
Let's see, 2013, largest refugee camp that was burned down in 2020. Locale Moria, near of Lesbos. Okay, enclosed was Greek. Okay, barbed wire with the chain. The military camp served as a European hotspot. It was a human rights as an open air prison. Damn, I mean, that's the housing, huh? It was Dokdub, the worst refugee. Nursing, suffering. Up to 3,000, however, 20,000. Okay, it's overcrowded. The camp expanded into a nearby olive grove known as Moria Jungle. Okay, take me out. Okay, cut down trees to use as firewood. Increase criminals, brilliance, vandalism, looting. Visited as a concentration camp. All right. Okay. Let's see. Looks like it's a lot of barbed wire. Damn. A fire in the camp killed one who was the wife of the man who would commit the 2023. Okay. Okay. The Greeks were okay. By then the camp was almost completely destroyed. Most of the refugees were homeless on the street. There was a man their evacuation. Greek police fired tear gas at them. Once they left home during protests demanding their evacuation. Evacuation? Like evacuate where? From the camp? Government is the first to start delivery by migrants protesting that the camp had been put in lockdown due to COVID-19 outbreak. Holy crap! Okay. Two other migrants below. Please. Right. Major procedural violations, including incomplete translations, and that the conviction was based largely on testimony from one of those who did not attend. Investigation. Improvised electricity supplies have been set up flammable tent like. Okay. Okay. Temporary facility set up. More organized close receptions approved. Be located in Lesbian. However, the Greek citizen broke the construction due to lack of environmental study and construction work has been put on hold. Sounds like a bunch of procedures holding everything back. Procedures versus humanity. Such is the case everywhere. Alright, anyways, let's keep going. From the shore of Lesbos, you could see the faint lights of the Middle East scattered across the coastline. We wanted to see where it all began, so we decided to buy ferry tickets to Ayvalık. We hired a Turkish translator and began discussing a cover story for security purposes. After the 2016 coup attempt in Turkey, the nation consistently ranked as one of the leading jailers of journalists in the world. At 23 years old, it didn't faze me. I was still running on the fumes of invincibility. Even as that illusion had started to crack, I responded not by waking up, but by gripping the illusion harder. We decided to tell the immigration that I was an Instagram model and we were just on vacation. It worked. Our crew included 2 Australian security guards, Jacko, who had worked security on my Australian tour, and his friend Mitch, whom I first met in the green room at one of my speeches in Queensland. Mitch sometimes went by Mitchell or Mitchie. They were always tossing around nicknames with that trademark Aussie candor. I'd occasionally get called Laws myself. Mitch was a seasoned professional with an impressive track record, and my head of security assured me he'd be a solid addition to the team. Rounding out the crew were our translator, Rafi, along with Colin, George, and me. Mitch and Rafi spent the first few days in Ayvalık visiting hairdressers for trims while gathering intel about trafficking movements. They overheard whispers about smuggling operations further north along the coast, near small farming towns. We decided to follow up on the information. We drove for hours, camping on the shorelines night after night, speaking with locals about the traffickers' usual routes. The farmers warned us that the smugglers were armed and wouldn't take kindly to anyone disturbing their profitable operations. Wait, trafficking? Is this... Did I read it right? Is it drug or human trafficking? Let me see. Oh, okay. It should be human trafficking, right? Because trying to traffic in migrants. Alright. On our third night, as I was drifting to sleep in the backseat of our van, Rafi suddenly heard something start the engine. The flies from the van illuminated the faces of dozens of migrants, shielding their eyes as they made their way toward the shore. We couldn't believe our eyes. We joined the group and intended to interview the travelers, most of whom had spent thousands on the journey in hopes of starting a new life. Eventually, we reached the shore. The group was waiting, unsure of when their boats would arrive, when suddenly the sound of helicopters filled the air. The Jandarma, the Turkish military police, were overhead. We rushed to hide out in a farmer's olive grove. Everyone sat in circles, our backs to the trees. Floodlights cutting through the darkness as the whir of the propeller blades echoed above us. Some in the group had received word that the traffickers would not come while journalists were present, and that there was someone planted among the crowd. Tensions mounted as men began to threaten us in hushed tones, and Rafi, our translator, urged us that it was time to leave. We quietly moved out of the grove and onto the dirt path, keeping an eye out for more gendarme patrols in the area. We were thrilled to have captured the footage we needed, real on-the-ground footage, but there was still one piece missing, footage of the operations going into Bulgaria. With plans to film with a militia patrolling the Bulgarian border, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to capture both sides of the story for full narrative. We made a long drive in our film van to the Kureli province, where we found a small town near the border. Our team split up. Mitch and Rafi went to speak with the villagers for intel, while Jacko, Colin, George, and I set off to capture B-roll of the border fence. The landscape was dotted with rolling hills of tall golden grass, largely dominated by sheep farmers. The weather was sunny and beautiful. The entire area felt frozen in time, like a snapshot from another era. I felt strangely at peace. It was one of those moments when filming didn't feel like work. Gathering B-roll was always my favorite part. It allowed us to take our time, perfecting each shot, like creating true cinema. We wanted Borderless to exceed anything alternative media had ever produced, both in terms of narrative and aesthetic. While George was getting some actual work done, Callan, Jacko, and I were goofing off at a hole we had found in the ground under the Bulgarian border fence. Callan was laughing hysterically as he filmed the staging a scene where Jacko was illegally entering the country from Bulgaria. He crawled through the hole, popping his head out of the ground while I held the microphone up and pointed, shouting to the camera, "Oi, it's a bloody migrant, a bloody illegal entering." In the midst of this silliness, we heard an engine in the distance. Jacko froze, his tone quickly changing as he urged us to clean up our equipment as fast as possible. It was some sort of military vehicle. I began shoving SD cards into my bra and socks while Colin and George scrambled to hide their gear in the trunk. We had purchased a bunch of family beach day supplies in Ayvalık, sand toys, a colorful ball, towels, and snorkels, intending to pass ourselves off as tourists as if we were arrested by the gendarme near the shoreline. Given that we were nowhere near the ocean now, the decoy supplies were ridiculous. Perhaps the most obvious were up to something red flag we could have waved. In the car, before things escalated, I sent a voice note to Mitch. "Help, we're surrounded by the military, they have guns. We don't know what to do." I quickly hid my phone afterward. I knew I shouldn't have sent it. Mitch and Rafi had made it clear that this was a one-off gig for them. They had jobs that required security clearances, and if things went sideways, our agreement was that they could cut and run without getting involved. They didn't know us outside of work, and they were not prepared to risk their careers for us. Within moments, we were surrounded by soldiers. They ordered us to line up and sit down outside the car. As they watched us with rifles in hand and barked things in Turkish at Jacko, he did his best to speak with them, but it was lost in translation, which only seemed to frustrate them more. They seized our van and insisted we pile into it with soldiers to guard us. The seats inside faced each other, and the Turkish man across from me couldn't have been more than a few years older. He had a cold, steely expression. The roads were rough and dirt-packed, and it felt like we drove for miles over the bumpy terrain. One particularly large jolt sent the barrel of his gun dangerously close to my stomach. I flinched. I wasn't sure if I was stressed or afraid. The disassociation set in, and I watched my life play out like a movie, anxiously wondering where the plot would lead. I played my character well. They drove us to a military base, and when they pulled the car over and ushered us out, Jacko spoke under his breath. "The military can't charge us," he muttered, glancing around. "As long as they don't hand us over to the gendarme, we should be fine." He nodded at us assertively. Cal and George were visibly on edge. We were led into a small holding room that reeked of concrete and disinfectant. I asked for a bathroom break, and they escorted me down the hallway to a bare, dirt-floored room with a hole in the ground and a flickering light overhead. Once I was alone, I quickly texted home sending a code message with a warning to contact a local MP if I didn't check in within 24 hours. Back in the holding room, food arrived, metal trays of chicken and rice. It was better than I expected. Hours went by before a doctor finally showed up. She walked in, took one look at us, and gasped. "Wow," she said. "You look like Nazis. I mean, the blonde hair, blue eyes, I wasn't expecting this." I laughed at the bizarre choice of words. We were told her usual checkups were for smugglers or migrants, and by UN law, they had to have doctors attend to ensure they weren't beaten or injured during arrest. We were okay. We waited anxiously. They asked various questions about the nature of our stay, and we noticed a soldier eyeing our camera. Callie and I exchanged worried glances, wondering if they'd find the footage of us goofing off by the border wall. It certainly wouldn't help our cause. It would only give them reason to hold us longer. Eventually, we saw a vehicle pull up outside. They tried to get a better look. Gendarme, the military police. Jacko let out a heavily accented fuck under his breath. They had a reason to charge us. We just didn't know what for yet. Jacko began plotting immediately. Which window to break, what to do, what to say, how to behave. Prior to that moment, he was perhaps one of the calmest, most collected people I'd ever met. He killed people in combat, fought in elite units, done many different tours and contacts. The change in his demeanor didn't bode well for us. I wasn't sure if we'd see Mitch or Rafi again. I wouldn't be surprised if they already left. It was what we'd agree on. They had lives outside my chaotic world to return to. Now fully in custody, they brought us to an old Gendarma building, and we shuffled out of a police vehicle into the office to meet our fate. As we walked in, I saw a familiar sight through the doorway of the main office. Rafi and Mitch were sitting on a bench waiting for us. They hadn't cut and run. They gave me a knowing look, one that said, "Of course we came to help." Any fear I had about our future was replaced with a warmth, knowing that the people I shared this journey with, no matter its end, were good. We didn't leave one another behind, even at a personal risk. We sat with our backs to the wall, perched on a wooden bench and facing the head officer's desk. A giant oil portrait of Ataturk hung on the wall behind the desk. A flickering light fixture swayed above us, and an ashtray rested on the old wooden table. Rafi, a large, strong, personable man with an infectious smile, began negotiating on our behalf immediately. Every so often we would glance up, hoping for answers, but he would motion for us to wait. My social intelligence had never been so strained, trying to discern our fate by reading the expressions and fluctuations of Rafi and the Gendarma officer's entirely Turkish conversation. Mitch began offering practical advice, how to sit, how to talk, what to expect, as well as alternative plans in case Rafi couldn't talk us out of this one. There was a sudden pause in the conversation as the officer turned to his old computer and started typing. I looked up at Rafi, silently asking how things were looking. He broke into a contagious smile. I smiled back, and then he started laughing. I couldn't help myself. I laughed too. "Not good, Lord, not good," he said, still chuckling. "You may be going to jail," he added, and we both laughed harder, that cheeky manic wheeze that you can't keep under your breath. I pressed my lips together, trying to hold it in, like a school kid who's just made eye contact with their friend across the room, or after the teacher's last scolding for their shenanigans. Rafi continued speaking, but I listened as if he were telling a joke. "They are writing up your forms right now. You trespass on military property. You're going to court tomorrow." Trespassing in a military zone in Turkey could result in a 1 to 3 year prison sentence, but that wasn't all. We were filming illegally in a military zone on the topic of national security. In a country known for its high rate of imprisoning journalists, things were looking bleak. Eventually, the officer handed us some forms, explaining them to Rafi, who translated for us. No longer smiling, his face went pale as he read them. "Okay, so these are the forms they have to legally give you. You have the option to consult your embassy about your arrest, or you can choose not to notify them." Kyle and George and I immediately reached for pens on the table to fill out the forms, but Rafi quickly interjected, "Don't sign the forms." He looked at the officer slightly exasperated, then back at us. "He made it clear to me that you won't be leaving this country if you sign those forms." Once our embassies were notified, this would become an international incident that could be used for bargaining. But there were no chips to bargain with yet. We weren't sure if this was just a ploy to not deny us our rights, one that could eventually lead us to a worse situation where no government would even know we were here. We trusted Rafi and put our pens down. The forms were torn up. As new forms were being filled out on the screen, Rafi kept gathering details about our legal position while bantering with the officer. Hours passed before some commotion broke out at the entrance of the station. It was the Feds, MIT, the National Intelligence Agency of Turkey. 4 well-dressed men and a woman walked in, followed by another group wheeling in a supercomputer. Our phones were taken, and they began downloading all our data. Rafi, Jacko, and Mitch exchanged glances that told me we'd somehow found ourselves in even deeper trouble than before. I was called in for questioning. A few of the men didn't speak English, but the woman did, and she spoke to me with a practiced directness. "Who do you work for? Which agency sent you here?" Never in my life had I wanted my detractors to be believed more. I replied, "Listen, I'm just a nobody who makes silly YouTube videos. I'm not working for anyone." They kept pressing, asking over and over which government I worked for, giving me a look that all but said, "Come off it. We know all influencers are paid assets." That seriously concerned me. I stuck to the same answer. They stuck to the same question. Have you ever seen that clip of a US senator repeatedly asking a TikTok Singaporean CEO if he's Chinese? It felt exactly like that. Nobody is leaving this room until you're Chinese. I felt like unless I invented an intelligence agency on the spot, they're never going to let me go. Eventually, either I convinced them or more likely, I just wore them down with sheer repetition. Then they brought up a book I'd written for Rebel Media, Barbarians, How Baby Boomers, Immigrants, and Islam Screwed My Generation. They asked if I hated immigrants and Islam. My stomach churned. There was little use in being evasive. They had everything I'd ever written laid out in front of me. "I don't hate immigrants, and I don't hate Muslims," I said. "I'm not a Muslim, and don't agree with the religion. But if that's your faith, so be it. I respect that. I don't think it's necessarily compatible with Western liberal democracies, though. Certainly not as a primary faith. I don't hate immigrants, but I do think the immigration rates we have are unsustainable for cultural cohesion and social services in the West." I was truthful, but careful with every word I chose. I wasn't sure what to expect. The room fell into silence before everyone spoke in Turkish, nodding their heads. To my shock, the woman finally replied, "We have similar views here and understand." For a brief moment, it felt like honesty might actually be my saving grace. Bro, pause for a second. Honesty, honesty should be able to save you out of everything, right? But I guess it failed for my relationship. Being honest was wrong, dude. They're supposed to. Oh man. She's right. There's some places where honesty will get you in trouble instead. But I would still stick to being honest because that's just me as a character. I hate being a liar. Or I hate being cunning too. Who's Michael? Oh, okay. Alright, let me see. Then she placed a picture on the table. I could have screamed, half in horror, half in hysterical laughter. It was an old Instagram post of mine. I was wearing a burqa, holding soy milk and a copy of the Communist Manifesto. It was a joke Hal and I had made in London a while back. I'd been through a lot, but explaining a burqa meme to the Turkish intelligence services while facing the possibility of years in prison was something I hadn't prepared for. Once again, no point lying now. I shrugged and awkwardly admitted it was a joke. I was making fun of more radical versions of Islam and leftism. I don't like the burqa. I think it's oppressive. I never wear one unless it was satire. The men didn't react. I'm not sure the woman even translated what I said. She pulled the phone back and stared at me intently. Then in a calm, measured tone, she said, "I do not like this either." Also, let me send a message real quick. National Night Out against... For a brief second, there was an unexpected moment of connection, one I'll never forget. Despite the difference between our worlds, not to mention our current positions, something in us aligned. She vowed her freedom as a woman. At the top of her game, educated and authoritative, she had a perspective that clashed with large factions of her nation's culture. She held my future in her hands, and yet in that moment I felt a quiet admiration for her. I liked her. The questioning dragged on for at least an hour. The group of Turkish intelligence officers and I continued to get along far better than I had expected. As we talked, I began to think my views on immigration culture weren't as controversial as I had once believed. Perhaps they were more widely shared, especially outside the Western framework. These conversations challenged my previous, more ignorant perspectives on non-Western cultures. It wasn't just about differing views. There was a directness, a certain honesty in the way they communicated, something that in my mind the West had long since lost. Eventually, I was dismissed. When I was finally allowed to return to my colleagues, they looked at me for some answer to their fate that I couldn't give. I still wasn't sure if the understanding between the officers and I meant any hope for our freedom. One of the Turkish intelligence officers had been left in the room to keep guard. He looked like he had stepped straight out of a movie, wearing a tight black shirt that hugged his lean frame, jeans cinched with a belt, and a cigarette that seemed permanently clutched between his fingers. Smoke filled the room, mingling with the tension. He offered us cigarettes too, and we took them, partly out of politeness, partly to steady our nerves. They brought tea as well, an unexpected comfort. Even though we faced criminal charges, the Turks treated us well. I made an effort at small talk, trying to distract myself. Ataturk looks European, you know. I hear there's a lot of European blood in the Turkish people. The officer didn't speak perfect English, but he caught my eye, quick assessing before replying with a smirk. I hear there's a lot of Turkish blood in Europeans. His eyes locked onto mine, a clear warning that any further banter was off the table. I lost track of time, but when they finally shuffled in to tell us our fate, it had been at least 10 hours, maybe more. Mitch and Rafi had made some sort of negotiation with the officers, the details of which I was never fully privy to. They got us out though, and I was forever grateful to them both. The Jandarma seemed surprised by the direction things were going, as the intel team gave us our release instructions with conditions that left no room for negotiation. Leave the country immediately and don't come back. The officer in black stepped outside the office and turned to look at me one last time. His gaze was sharp, words clear and cutting. Next time, don't choose Turkey. We grabbed our things and shoved them into bags without a second thought, not stopping to even fold his shirt or tuck away his stray socks. The urgency hit us as we rushed to the cars, hearts pounding with the fear of a last-minute change of mind. What had they found on our phones? What kind of reports were already making their way up through the channels? We couldn't know. All we could do was get to the airport before anything, and anyone could stop us. I didn't feel a sense of peace until I was safely on the plane headed for home. I hadn't paid much attention to him for most of the borderless trip, but after witnessing Mitch's reaction to threats against freedom and job security, I started to see him differently.
He showed a genuine interest in my safety and well-being in a way I never felt from a man before. Sure, he was being paid for his role, but there was a kindness to him that I found captivating. He was gentle with those around him and had an easy warmth with children. His empathy seemed boundless, extending not just to the world at large, but to me as well. We shared many values, a mutual desire to reconnect with our faith and bring some stability to our lives, to escape the chaos of politics and the military and policing lifestyle. He made his feelings for me known, but always with respect, never crossing any boundaries or making me feel uncomfortable. I liked him. In the dating world, finding someone who believed in marriage, had a stable career, attended church, and wanted to start a family was almost impossible. There's no way. There's no way. That sounds impossible. In the dating world, finding someone who believes in marriage, stable career, attends church, and wants to start a family is almost impossible. What? That there's no way. I don't believe this, dude. I believe everyone thinks this way. Am I wrong? What the fuck? He was the kind of man I knew I wouldn't meet often. As the Borderless project came to a close, our conversations turned to the idea of dating and what the future might hold. I didn't bring it up. Honestly, I was hesitant. I told him that as wonderful as he was, the logistics just didn't add up. One of us would have to move and had already spent too much time away from Canada. I couldn't see myself moving to Australia, need to build a stable home and community. But then he said it. He moved to Canada. He'll leave everything behind just for the chance to date me, with intentions of building a future together. Okay, before I read on, if I have to analyze this, the fact that Lauren said what she said means that she's not really into this person, whereas he is heavily invested into her. He's so into her that he will like give up all these things, whereas for her, she wouldn't give up like certain things. She wouldn't like sacrifice a bunch of stuff to move in with her. So I don't think her love or feelings, I guess if she calls it that way, for him is as deep as he is. But that's weird because I thought a few chapters ago I read that she has a son. Am I right? Am I reading this correctly? She had a son. Does that mean she either married before or a child born out of wedlock and had previous relations and they somehow didn't end up right? And now or we went back in time and this is the real father. Or maybe it didn't work out. I don't know. Just saying. I should have said no. I should have said no to the start of many relationships in my life. But I never heeded the warnings in my soul. What warnings? Looking back, my dissatisfaction was often valid. Some partners didn't want the same things I did. Some had betrayed me. In some cases, I prioritized ambition over being a present, loving partner. Huh? Okay. But when those relationships ended, instead of taking time to heal, to reflect, or to do the hard work of finding myself. What the fuck does that mean? Finding myself. Is she talking about self-improvement or understanding herself more? Okay. Finding myself. I jumped again and again into the next one. Okay, damn. Alright. I told myself I was searching for something real, something lasting. In many ways I was, but I didn't know how to build it. I didn't understand why none of my relationships felt like the kind of love I longed for. And underneath that search was a deeper fear, the fear of being alone. Bro, same here, bro. Being alone is so scary, dude. The fear of sitting still long enough to confront my own thoughts. So I moved quickly, let go of what didn't feel right, and chased new connections before I never laid a foundation within myself. I was selfish, believing I deserved an epic and unforgettable story, but I never took the time to become the kind of person who could build or sustain that kind of relationship. Never took the time to seek out a partner who could truly fulfill that role. All while scoffing at the modern world for its culture of fleeting connections, refusing to slow down and acknowledge the log in my own eye. Although the excitement of a new, shiny relationship can sometimes give the illusion of newfound depth and meaning, over time my relationships felt empty because I was empty. What? Her relationships felt empty because she was empty. Okay, I guess that makes sense. But then she's blaming herself then, isn't she? While Mitch's offer to move to Canada felt like something straight out of a romance film, I returned home skeptical, bracing myself for disappointment and expecting to move on. I had recently relocated from Toronto back to my hometown, preparing to rebuild my life there in the east side of the political world. I wasn't certain what the future held, but then he told me his plane was landing in Vancouver, and before I knew it, there he was, carrying 2 massive army duffel bags, ready to begin a new chapter. I was utterly swept off my feet. When my wishes offered to me with Felix in this room, I was embracing myself. Alright, so she said yes, and then alright, and he's from the military, came, and they are in a relationship. I had found a man who wasn't just unafraid of my chaotic life, but wanted to shield me from a world that had nearly consumed me. I was home, surrounded by family, and here was a soldier who flew halfway around the world to pursue me as if I were a princess in a story. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt safe and at peace. It was as if life was finally about to change for the better. Okay, but except she kind of alluded before something bad, or wait, hold on a second. I should have said no. She should have said no. Looking back, her dissatisfaction was alright. So guys, like she's kind of like talking about her gut feelings. Then she should have said no, but for some reason said yes. But she didn't explain why said no. I guess she should have said. I guess I don't know, bro. Trying to figure out, but I guess she also has some confusion of it. Huh. Okay, anyways, chapter 18 is retirement party. I'm gonna pause it here for now. Alright, I'm gonna change the fireplace here to this instead. Chapter 18, retirement party. We got married fast. Way too fast. Oh, okay, so she married him, huh? Within the first few months of our dating, Mitch asked me to marry him. All he had to offer at the time was a diamond he bought off a warlord and a promise of what was to come. He wanted to have the rest of the ring custom made and engraved, something unique to seal the commitment. Once we decided on marriage, we didn't want to wait. We were ready to start family right away. Everything felt like a fever dream. A headlong dive into the life we envisioned, a frantic push to bring our shared fantasy to life. People assumed we got married because of a surprise pregnancy, but our son was very much planned. We did fast-track the wedding, partly because we were expecting, but all of it was intentional. We were completely unhinged, fueled by hope and the wild, unshakable belief that we were meant to be. Shit, who was she married to again? Mitch? Who's this Mitch person? Oh yeah, the part where she like gone. Okay. I was married, pregnant, and my borderless documentary was about to be published. Naturally, my husband wanted me to visit his family in Australia to share the exciting news. The only issue was that since my last trip there, the one where we first met, the Australian government had added me to a list called VACCU. Essentially, it's the flag on your passport for character reasons, typically reserved for people convicted of criminal activities, those involved in terrorism, or apparently politically incorrect YouTubers. In early 2019, I applied for a general visitor visa, only to be rejected. Even if we settled in Canada, Australia was still part of Mitch's life that he couldn't let go of. I knew I had to find a way in. For months, I sent inquiries and called government helplines but got nowhere. Mitch visited home a few times, but I had to stay behind, pregnant, emotional, and increasingly isolated. I was less active online, and I hoped that would help my case, but I wasn't ready to leave public life completely. Maybe I'd still write the occasional article or return to filmmaking once my son and hopefully more children were older, but the rejections wore me down. Being separated from my husband during such a vulnerable time made the stakes feel heavier with each passing month. It became increasingly clear, as long as I maintained a media presence, the door to Australia would remain shut. Alright, so based on what she said, I guess if you marry someone, then you have to be there when they're at their most vulnerable moments. I eventually chose to step away from public life entirely. After Borderless was released, I published a retirement article and sent it, along with a new visa request to the government. The response confirmed I still failed the character test due to my previous conduct and content that may have incited discord, but my retirement had worked. They explicitly cited it, along with the personal nature of the visit, as the reason for my application wouldn't be refused. It was clear. Stepping away from politics wasn't just a choice, it was the cost of entry. The message ended with a chilling warning. Any future controversy could result in a ban, and this note on my record would count heavily against me. So in the end, it wasn't conviction or burnout that ended my career, it was a government mandate. I always believe Western democracies respected free speech, even when the views expressed were provocative or unpopular. Mine certainly were. I never imagined they'd be grounds for exile. It was a slow, disoriented unraveling of everything I thought I understood about the free world. The notion that only authoritarian regimes punish dissent no longer held. I came to see that power protects itself no matter the flag it flies. The good guys I believed in as a child were just stories we told ourselves, and once I let go of that illusion, the sting of losing my political voice began to fade. And outside the ruins of that world, I was finally building something real. But just as I was preparing to publish my retirement letter and wrap up Borderless, The ghosts of that old world came knocking. One of them was Milo Yiannopoulos, a previous colleague known as much for controversy as for commentary. He began sending me strange messages. Apparently, he had gone into some dispute with my former film crew, who had since moved on to work with other high-profile figures like Alex Jones. They knew I was stepping away and had wished me well. I had little idea what Cal and George had been up to since we filmed Borderless the year before, but Milo was working on some kind of expose about them, and he wanted me in the middle of it. It was exactly the kind of drama I was trying to leave behind. These so-called investigations rarely had anything to do with real political reform. More often, they were just personal grudges or enemy finance hit jobs dressed up as journalism. Hit pieces and public cancellations never tell the whole story. In this climate, false accusations blur the lines so much that real predators can hide in plain sight, while decent people often get destroyed, not because they're guilty, but because they're bad at the game. I told Milo as much, explained my decision to leave politics and the complications surrounding my visa. He remained polite, but there was an unmistakable undercurrent of menace in his tone that I didn't appreciate. He already was impressed with me for declining to do a tour of Australia with him, and I was somewhat concerned he was the kind of guy who didn't take rejection well. Once I published my resignation article in the summer of 2019, it wasn't long before Milo published an article of his own. To my surprise, it seemed to focus as much on my reputation as it did on my videographers, maybe even more so, given how much of it was based on fabrications about my life. He claimed I had been a secret leftist all along, working to dismantle the right wing throughout my entire career, citing absurd evidence like me allegedly professing love for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in private, and collaborating with Antifa-adjacent activists. Well, he got me on one point at least. She's hot, what can I say? As for my supposed Antifa connections, Milo included a short secret recording that Tommy Robinson had made of me, in which I admit to meeting with a far-left pressure group called Hope Not Hate. Of course, the clip conveniently left out the fact that I was meeting with them to secretly record the group, James O'Keefe style. The meeting was uneventful, and the audio was unusable. Tommy already knew the story. Then, out of the blue, he called me one day asking me to repeat it. It got so strange that I kept asking if he was recording the call. He swore he wouldn't do something like that. Not long after that, I heard that very call, heavily edited without any context, played in a documentary he made. Poetic irony. I attempt to make my undercover debut, and instead I end up with a cameo in someone else's propaganda film. Lesson learned, God. I should have laughed it off. The more time I spend outside the political world, the more embarrassed I am by how seriously I once took these allegations. It's not even that they were unfounded, though they were. It's that the whole thing feels so childish. A secret leftist, as if we all don't have at least one at the dinner table on holidays. Who cares if I were? What does that even mean? Are we still in high school? Why are any of us even talking like this? Yet back then, I did care, and it was devastating. What stung my ego the most was Milo's claim that I had never written my own content. He alleged that I traded sex for video ideas and scripts to climb the political ladder, a classic trope against women in politics and media. Almost poetic, given my past criticisms of feminism, a cosmic joke at my expense. Of course, it had to unfold this way. The accusation was so ridiculous, it should have been obvious to anyone with a shred of common sense. No one needs to sleep with someone for ghostwritten content, especially when most of my work consists of man-on-the-street videos. The whole notion was bafflingly stupid. I've been clear, I was no trad saint. If that had been the allegation, fair enough, but I wasn't guilty of what Milo claimed. And if it was the scandal he was after, I was hardly the best target. Plenty of my male peers in the dissident space were hiring escorts, cheating, using drugs, even committing crimes. It didn't escape me that many of the loudest amplifiers of his articles were the ones most guilty of that behavior, and not coincidentally, men I rejected either romantically or professionally. And yes, I can already hear the whining, feminist this, feminist that. I didn't flinch when people called me a racist for suggesting immigration rates might be a tad too high. I'm certainly not losing sleep over being called a feminist for pointing out the glaring hypocrisy in right-wing media around gender. You can see in the podcasts that dominate right-wing spaces, panels of men dragging in groups of OnlyFans girls, shaming and humiliating them for their sexual past, pretending they represent modern womanhood. There's no female equivalent on the right, no podcasts where men are lined up and held to account for their own sexual behavior, or being the main drivers of OnlyFans. Instead, you get endless monologues from self-styled truth-tellers, insisting that men are supposed to sleep around, while women must remain chaste, as if that's not completely antithetical to the conservative, religious, and family values the space generally claims to champion. And that's just what played out in public. Behind the scenes, the culture shaped by those beliefs was a mess. The same men building platforms to shame women for having sex outside of marriage were often the ones most aggressively trying to sleep with them. It was a rigged game. If a woman said yes, she was proof women had no virtue. If she said no, they'd sulk, badmouth her, or quietly blacklist her. I saw this cycle play out constantly in my life and in the lives of women around me. It would have been funny if it weren't so bleak. Everyone involved seemed trapped in a warped, self-defeating performance. Honestly, at least Andrew Tate was publicly shameless about being a pimp and embracing double standards. It's a more honest take than pretending any of this was about morals. Even beyond the podcast circuit in the more polished professional world, there's no female equivalent to someone like Donald Trump or Elon Musk. A woman with endless baby daddies would never be taken seriously within the Republican Party. When you build a system where men are granted limitless moral indulgences while women face social destruction for far less, you don't create a culture of virtue, you create a culture of madness. It's gaslighting at an industrial scale. The truth is, you couldn't even fix it by making the standards go both ways, because there were never any real standards to begin with, just pharisaical sneering dressed up as moral clarity. This is the world I operated in for a decade, and it made me worse at relationships, not better. Had I followed the examples of my savior of the Western world peer set, I may have actually become the caricature Milo spun of me, using people for their bodies, treating intimacy like a transaction. But even at the height of my career, I was still a romantic at heart, looking for a life partner. I made my dating mistakes the way our ancestors intended, awkwardly, emotionally, and without a single app. Oh, I love it, dude. Or ghost writing agreement in sight. Bro, same here. I agree. This is great. That's the way it should be, bro. Okay. Anyways. Still, I somehow became a lightning rod for internet morality panic. A friend joked that I should get a shirt like the one from the movie Easy A. It felt fitting. Only in this version, it wasn't high school rumors spread by teenagers. It was a middle-aged man pounding out an 11,000-word think piece about my dating life like it was Watergate. At the end of the day, I'm human. I enjoyed a good relationship as much as the next person. I made poor choices that sometimes led to heartbreak, but Milo's accusations weren't rooted in reality. They were projections. Ironically, I think they mostly came because I was trying to walk away from the very people who I follow away from healthier parts. I seen behind the curtain, participated to a degree, then decided it wasn't for me. I wanted out, I wanted to heal, to clear my head, and see if I could still build something real, a family. Wait, Milo's accusations were projections? If Milo's accusations were projection. A defense mechanism in a country their own unacceptable thoughts and feelings to others. Alright, so actually, so they're attributing their own unacceptable thoughts to others, which is so does that mean they assume what the way Lauren is thinking about is how they're thinking about? Is that what it means? Bro, this is such a tough word to understand. Where does it come from? I was wondering if it come from therapy or something. What is projection? Milo, what's it called again? Milo Yiannopoulos, Lauren Southern. Oh shoot, where is it? Daniel Lombrazzo. Ian, no, it's Milo. Let's can't find Milo. Alright, whatever. Milo I don't understand that part. But walking away isn't easy when people know what you've seen. The darker side of that dissident world doesn't like loose ends. You don't get to dip a toe and then pull back. Oops, don't really like that, but don't worry. I won't tell anyone what you're up to. That made me both a complicit coward and a threat. The worst possible place to be, and exactly why I was hit with a reputational nuke. At first, most dismissed the article as nonsense, but as I stayed silent, even skeptics started to believe it. I had my reasons, my visa, but I couldn't share them. The traction was faster than I expected. Thousands upon thousands of Twitter notifications sharing the article, spreading like wildfire. It felt orchestrated, like someone was pulling the strings. In the piece, Milo pointed to various men who claimed I had sexually taken advantage of them for business purposes. Of course, he never named any of these men. While I knew the story was false, I struggled to determine how many were entirely fabricated versus how many were just guys in a space nursing a rejection wound or a personal gripe. Eventually, a friend tipped me off. Andrew Tate had been circulating the story in his private group, The War Room, a collection of men who were paid to promote and amplify his content. He had openly and proudly told them regarding the men on record with Milo. Everyone in the space knows it was me. Secrets out. Oh well. He shared a chat with another content creator who was apparently involved in the piece, Paul Joseph Watson. Okay. In the conversation, Tate sent a voice note that appeared to outline some sort of strategy. Watson responded, seemingly in agreement. Sounds like a plan. I later discovered that just before Milo's article dropped, Watson shared my retirement announcement on his Telegram, writing, "What type of young woman with a huge audience of male incels jerking off with one hand and throwing money at her with the other is going to retire?" That sounds like something Andrew Tate says, like word for word. It feels like it. We all know the market value of women in media only decreases as they get older. Some would say she's retiring for the sake of marriage and having kids. I'm sorry, but I just don't buy it. If I were a cynical person, I'd say something sinister is about to come out that will shock the conservative world, and this retirement is a manufactured exit to avoid something embarrassing and dirty. I wouldn't put it past a woman who falsely accused me of rape to lie about why she's retiring. Wow, what? That's such a sinister way to put it, dude. From Lauren's perspective, man, that must be hard hitting. I was baffled. I had never made any accusation of this sort against Watson. It was a pure fabrication, and in reality, I was retiring for the sake of family and children. Paul, along with the other associates of Tate, immediately amplified the article as soon as it was released. Later, despite offering his initial condolences, Tommy Robinson would make his own video claiming a woman he knew was going to make false allegations, including falsely stating I traveled back to Romania to see Tate again. He lied about many things, both directly and by omission. Not once he mentioned the very first words I said to him in that cab the next morning. I was devastated. He could have simply claimed ignorance about what happened that night. Instead, he chose to actively lie. For a long time, I tried to understand why. What could possibly motivate someone to do something like that? Alright, before I read on, let me try to think about why myself. Alright, so she already knows that there's some types of guys that take rejection not so well. And because of that could feel resentment, and that could be the reason why. Like these men just like take that resentment and just they try like behind the scenes direct something. So it looks like they're not part of it, but they're secretly but they generally are, right? They're trying to hide it, but obviously to her, she sees it very clearly. I think it's exactly what Lauren thinks it is then. Like, humans aren't perfect, but because we're not perfect, we have these bad things, and because we have these bad things, we tend to do these, like, things that they're obviously going to regret later on because they know it's going to be a lie, and they know it's a bad thing to do. That's my best guess. Personal grudges, though? I don't know. Okay, anyways. As far as I remember, the last time I saw Tommy was in a hotel hallway after we finished an interview about my UK band. He was chasing me down the corridor, urging me to come back to his room to do some cocaine. I had no interest in returning to the spiral that began when he first introduced it to me at the club in UK. I said I wouldn't be going down that road again. I walked away. I can only assume that encounter has something to do with his animosity toward me now. You know what? She might be right. I think she might be right. But it's not just that. It's like a whole bunch of things that builds up, and that to him, like he might have taken that as like, oh, she doesn't like me anymore for some reason. And it's because I'm this and all that, But perhaps it wasn't just personal bitterness. Maybe it was something worse, self-preservation. After all, what kind of damage would it do to Tommy's brand built on exposing Muslim grooming gangs if it ever came out to light that he once brought a young woman to a compound run by a self-professed Muslim pimp, while high out of his mind, and she was assaulted on that very trip. In his mind, maybe protecting his image meant making me the problem, and maybe, like so many others in that world, he told himself whatever story he needed to feel like the good guy. Oh, that could be true too. While the public assumed the only reason these men turned on me was that the accusations must be true, I saw their motivations clearly. A message was being sent to me, and the narrative was being carefully crafted, one with a clear objective. Lauren is not trustworthy. Lauren uses men for sex. Lauren falsely accuses men of rape. The reason she retired is because it's all true. And there was one man who stood to benefit most from this smear campaign. The same man openly bragging about his role in Milo's piece, Andrew Tate. Wait, how does it benefit Andrew Tate, though? I don't get it. Yeah, I don't. Worse, the eventual war room leaks I received from a friend suggested that the entire Romanian business meeting had likely been a setup. In the leaked messages, Tate laughed with war room members about the idea that any real investment plan ever existed. Do pimps give girls money? He mocked. We didn't invest a fucking penny. Dropped her at the hotel, invited her for a steak. She came. Then the club. She came. Then the house. She came. Of course, he conveniently left out the part where I never returned to his house. In reality, I was carried back to my hotel room. Did Tommy know it was a setup the whole time? Was I traffic? What the fuck? The more of this story I unraveled, the stranger it all became. Andrew was slowly gaining followers online, and then I realized he had DM'd me a year before we ever met. At the time, I didn't know who he was. I didn't connect the dots when Tommy introduced us. Reading the messages back now, they just have the energy of a throwaway fan interaction. He felt like one of thousands of small accounts that messaged me back then, hardly any followers. Nothing that stood out. In those days, I interacted with my audience constantly. I had no concept of how dangerous it can be when you don't know who you're talking to. Letting people get close, letting them feel like they own some part of you. I send kind, thoughtful email replies to fans only for them to morph into years-long, one-sided, schizophrenic relationships that slowly wore me down. That openness stopped being safe. We exchanged a few messages where Andrew cheered on my activism. I replied kindly, even made a quip about a funny tweet I'd seen on his page. But when the conversation shifted and he asked if I lived in England, I stopped responding. Questions like that were always a subtle bid to hang out. Like, no, I'm not going to visit you. Random person on the internet. I figured my silence made that clear, but apparently he found other ways to get together, through mutual connections and false business meetings. I agonized over all of this. How intentional was it? How much of it was planned? Even now, I don't know. At that point, oh, dude, you know what? We know Andrew's a crazy mind planner, dude. I guess now she's starting to realize that as well. At that point, what haunted me most was the question of whether Milo was paid to write the article, but frankly, I could think of at least half a dozen people who would jump at the chance to ruin me, Milo himself included. Just writing that sentence makes me feel like I've been living in an alternate universe Gossip Girl with significantly less attractive characters, a bunch of Machiavellian nerds. There were clearly many conversations going on behind the scenes about what my future, or lack thereof, would be in the movement. I knew too much about them all. Still, I couldn't believe the smear campaign had begun before I had even spoken a word about Tate's criminal activities. I couldn't believe how naive I had been to think that my silence and complicity in this cover-up would protect me. But when you operate like the Tate brothers, you live in a constant state of paranoia, playing like whack-a-mole with perceived threats before they can even materialize. At any given moment, you're haunted by your past, ironically often creating the very future you fear. The entire episode disturbed me to my core. To their credit, their plan worked. They got the results. They psychologically broke me. I never wanted to face these people again. Even if Andrew wasn't actively paying for it, he was actively a part of creating and promoting the article. Andrew had been plotting to position himself as a hero of the right-wing media for a while. He'd been reaching out and building as many connections as possible with figures in the media sphere, flying them out to his compound in Romania, giving them donations, gathering information on them. My public profile was much bigger than his at the time and held significant influence over the dissident right-wing audience. For him to break into that space, he would need to eliminate any potential threats, especially a threat like me, who could turn my loyal audience against him before he'd even manage to get his brand going. I wouldn't put all these pieces together for a while, but at the time, all I knew was that my audience was gone now. Aside from a handful of fans and friends I personally knew, my most dedicated political followers had already branded me a traitor and a whore. Believing I had vanished before the full force of these allegations hit, knowing what was coming, although it would still take Tate some time before he was able to properly enter the right-wing media space, I watched from afar as his public profile grew bit by bit. Strange, seemingly inorganic interviews began to emerge with personalities he had encountered in my former arena, appearing with increasing frequency. I was one of very few watching closely then. I'm not sure anyone else saw the repeated stories about him, seemingly amplified by bots. His early failed attempts to manufacture fame, he was dedicated, I'll give him that, and eventually he got the formula right. Now you might be asking yourself, why didn't I just sue Milo for defamation? Get some extra cash for my political retirement and clear my name. The truth is that the general public, those who don't live in the online or media world, have a profoundly skewed perception of how defamation laws actually work. In reality, defamation law is largely designed to protect the wealthy. It's not meant for the average person, certainly not for mid-tier internet celebrities like me. Take my Wikipedia page, for example. It's never represented me accurately. It was a carefully curated hit piece managed by anonymous activists who despise me. Even Larry Sanger, Wikipedia's co-founder, had warned that the site had become an activist-controlled narrative machine, but correcting the record was an option. Wikipedia isn't a publisher. It's a platform where anonymous editors shape public perception, often with no oversight. To this day, one of the opening paragraphs of my page still falsely states that I was demonetized from YouTube and banned from GoFundMe, neither of which ever happened, but truth isn't a requirement for Wikipedia. What matters is what a handful of dedicated editors decide is the official story. Wikipedia itself couldn't be held accountable anyway, and tracking down the individual editors responsible required a Norwich order just to uncover their identities. Assuming they weren't scattered across different jurisdictions where legal action would be impossible. Even if I pursued a case, I need a 6-figure retainer just to get started. You know what? She's right. Like, these lawyers and political systems cost so much money. It's all screwed up. All right, but it goes back to what I believe in, that the world values procedures so much. The procedures they made, all these, is intended to help. Like, the purpose of defamation is to, like, you know, clear your reputation by someone, right? But the procedures meant to clear your reputation has gotten so complicated nowadays that people can just exploit them. And do the procedures change? At this point, they're upholding the procedures themselves, and it's doing the opposite of what it is. Another rant I have on the procedures of this world. All right. Anyways, what is Lauren Southern's? I feel like I searched this up before, but basically, she says about GoFundMe. She was demonized by YouTube and banned from GoFundMe. Sources cited is the New York Times and BuzzFeed News. Nice. Oh my goodness. You know, I wish I had a family someday too, actually. She got married at like 23, right? That's 3 years younger than me. Damn. My fucking coworkers told me that I'm too young. What the fuck? Anyways. While suing someone like Milo for defamation wouldn't come with the same hurdles as going after Wikipedia, it would still involve the same cost. Not to mention, once you're classified as a public figure, the press is granted significant leeway to publish whatever opinions they chose about you. The internet is a dangerous place, and these aren't lessons taught in school. They're ones I learned firsthand. Although credit where credit is due to the few teachers who warned us not to use Wikipedia as a source, even more so to those who encourage a general healthy skepticism in all media, at the end of the day, I couldn't respond to the accusations even if I wanted to. I felt unjust, but I accepted it as the cost of moving from my old life to a new one. I stopped looking. I didn't care anymore. My real life needed me. It was time to move on. At least that's what I told myself, but deep down I did care. My soul ached. I felt betrayed, not just by the online world, but by the very people I had risked everything for. When we talk about parasocial relationships, it's usually the fans who are looking into a celebrity's life. What we don't discuss as much is the parasocial bond creators develop with their audience. I felt a sense of ownership over them. I believe they owe me loyalty. I had sacrificed so much for them, lost a part of my soul for them, faced imprisonment for them, put my life on the line for them. But the truth is, they never owed me anything. Or, you know what? Maybe they don't. Like, maybe we don't, right? Because, like, you know, what she said there, it also is similar to, like, how a guy would, like, shower a woman with gifts, right? Nowadays, some people call it love bombing. But basically, you buy this for them, you sacrifice this for them, sacrifice their... In their mind, they're thinking, I sacrificed so much for them, all right? And then if you ask them out and they reject you, you might feel, oh, I sacrificed so much. Like, it's true. She actually doesn't owe you anything. But the feeling, like, exists there, basically, right? She says she had the feeling. Even though she knows that her fans doesn't owe her anything, she felt like she basically had that feeling. That feeling existed where she wanted loyalty from her audience because of how much she had sacrificed for them. So, you know, it's a similar sort of concept here, I guess. All right. Yo. All right. They were never mine to begin with. I built a parasocial relationship with them just as much as they had with me, in many ways. I was the one who mistook their attention for something deeper, something personal. I wanted their loyalty, but I should have asked myself, loyalty to what? A version of me they had built in their heads? Or the real me, who had never really been the person they imagined in the first place? Ooh, sounds like another thing around the topic of being yourself. Who is the real you now? What is be yourself in this case? I sank into a deep depression. Everything I built had been lost. I watched people I previously called friends mock and speculate about my life. The same accounts professing their love for me days earlier were now cheering on my demise. I blamed everyone but myself. The situation was messed up. There's no doubt about that, but I wasn't setting myself up for success by refusing to see how my own choices had led me here. I had sold my soul. Enjoying the praise of people who don't truly know you is a dangerous game because they don't know you. They can be made to believe anything about you, and it's not their job to dig deeper to find out who you really are. They don't owe me for that. Maybe what they owe themselves, though, is to stop caring so much about the drama of the famous, because in the end, that obsession is as much of a perversion of the mind as my own obsession with their thoughts. At the end of the day, I got on the fame train and rode it until it was going at speeds that threatened to kill me before I jumped off, and then I was angry at the train for taking me so far. I may not have known exactly what I was getting into, but no one forced me onto that train. I wasn't a helpless passenger. I wanted the ride. I thrive on the speed, the intention, and sense of purpose it gave me. Oh, bro, I don't like when people like use metaphors for these kinds of like situations. Like, do you see? I just wanted to describe how it exactly is without using metaphor. Okay, I say I jumped off, but really the train went off the rails. It stopped being fun. I like to focus on the crash, on my victimhood, but the part that's hardest to admit, I was angry that the train had stopped serving me. I built friendships, work relationships, and a sense of purpose on the foundation of sand because all of it was to serve my ego. The meaning I thought I was getting from this life wasn't even rooted in the real world, it was digital. C.S. Lewis always said that we are not humans having spiritual experiences, but souls having a physical experience. The material world, he suggests, is what separates us from higher things. Much religious literature, including the Bible, calls us to rise above the material and enter the spiritual. But I believe we've gone one step farther. We find ourselves now in a third degree of separation from God. We've made ourselves into digital beings. First, we were souls having a physical experience. Now we are physical bodies having a digital experience. Just pulling myself out of the digital world to remember that I am a human, that I am a body, that I am in this present moment was challenging enough. Renewing any sort of spiritual life, that was an entirely different question. I had to reconnect with the world beyond the digital one before I could begin to reconnect with the world beyond the physical one. Poetically, it was time to leave the matrix. At least I had my marriage. I may not have had these people, these fans, or the praise and status I once enjoyed, but I had my husband, my new family, my life away from politics. You know what? That's basically all you need. Like, if you got a husband, loving family, you're basically good. Hopefully that's a good husband, obviously. Chapter 19 is called the Anzacs. Alright, so chapter 19 is called the Anzacs. As I'm writing this, it's Remembrance Day. I wish I could remember the sacrifices of our veterans the way I used to, as a distant outsider looking into a world I only knew from history classrooms and movies. My husband was a veteran, and my image of men who go to war was just as shattered as his image of Valkyries on YouTube. I'm short. When my husband and I got together, we felt we were madly in love, destined to be. What neither of us fully understood, and what's been hard to admit, is that we hadn't actually fallen in love with each other. What the fuck? What? They were madly in love, we hadn't actually fallen in love with each other? We'd fallen for a mirage, an idealized version of who the other person was. My mirage was the man I had known during the borderless trip, the version of him that existed only in those few months of travel when he was paid to cater to my every need. The man who stepped off the airplane in Canada and professed his desire to start a family with me, and time when he could be the man he thought he wanted, rather than the real complicated person he was. But aren't they like... is this what people are talking about? Like, they want men, like women wanting men to be themselves then? Because this guy, in order to get what he wanted, he wasn't himself then. He was pretending to be someone who she wanted him to be, or who he wanted her. Like, he had this image that he wanted to be, so that he comes off looking good to other people, right? He's done all of that, but like, couldn't you say that's part of him? Not like, or is she saying like they're faking it the whole time? You see, all right, what's her mirage then? His mirage was the me he'd seen on screen. The confident, polished version of myself splashed across news broadcasts and YouTube videos in Australia, a persona his friends admired and even encouraged him to pursue. It seemed to me he loved the idea of the YouTuber, not the actual woman behind the caricature. Alright, but look. Like, if you... Of course this happens, right? Every time you meet someone,
when you're dating, of course you want to be acting good for them. If you act wrong, then of course you won't get together too, right? But then it's like at the same time you should know they have bad things too, but that's all right. Like you don't leave someone for that too. If you're married, then if you're married to each other, oh whatever. Maybe this is how people today nowadays they're like they treat marriage as something that like they don't treat it seriously, right? And marriage, you make your vows, you stay together, you're madly in love with each other. Even if you're not in love with each other, you made a promise during marriage, all right? So you have to stay together. If you divorce just because you don't love each other more, that's terrible. That's the line to all the people you made the vow to in marriage. All right. Anyways, enough of me ranting. When we first met, it was in the green room of one of my Packed Australia shows. He wanted a picture with me. I obliged. Looking back, I realized he'd likely asked my security team for a chance to meet me. Neither of us were prepared for the complexities and pain that came when the illusions shattered. It wasn't all bad though, and for what it's worth, I feel that all the pain caused in our relationship was a result of trauma, deeply unprocessed trauma that neither of us were equipped to deal with at this time. Mitch didn't really listen to music. I'm not sure he cared for it much. It was one of the strangest things about him. If he did play music, it always seemed to have some deep personal significance. Most often, it was war songs, especially Anzac war songs, from the Australia-New Zealand Army Corps. Okay, I guess she thought that was a bit weird, huh? Let's see. My husband was enamored with the legend of his work, and there was something beautiful about seeing a man so passionate about what he does. Oh, so she likes passionate people, huh? Man, a person who is so passionate about what he does. That's something I lack. I don't have time to be for like doing the things I'm passionate about for now. But I don't think he knew how to be anything other than a soldier or a hired gun. When you see a man who appears to love his uniform more than he loves you, it's an ache that's hard to explain. Oh, damn. Okay. I know I'm not the first or the last woman to live through that. I still can't help but laugh at the names of towns down under. You know what? I should make a list of all the things women find ick about. Like, not like the ones you see online where it's like, oh, it's about everything. But like what they actually have an ick about, you know? There's things that, like, we don't learn. Like, men don't learn these when they're children. So we kind of just have to experience it and then we learn it. But then it's a bit too late by then. Alright, anyways. I still can't help but laugh at the names of towns down under. We take road trips through places like Wagga Wagga and Tumbarumba, visiting wineries along the way. We'd go swimming in the Murrumbidgee. I have vague dreamlike memories of standing in the muddy river, holding my son as an infant, and watching hundreds of cockatoos fly overhead. I know they're real memories, but they hurt too much to dwell on for longer than a moment. During COVID, we drive for long stretches through the outback, dogs in the back of the car, trying desperately to visit family before lockdowns closed off state borders. We always stop for a pub lunch in Goulburn, a small town in New South Wales. We often talk about our dream of buying a farm there, a place with land, dogs, and ATVs. A place to escape the world before it all descended to chaos, something we both felt was inevitable after everything we'd seen. There was a skydiving joint in rural NSW, not the safest of places, with a troubling history of accidents and deaths. Mitch loved taking jumps there, although at the time I didn't fully understand why it was so important to him, but it made me glad that he had something he loved. Now I think I understand better. It was probably the one thing that made him feel truly alive. The adrenaline gave him a moment of peace, bringing him back to a place where he had purpose and identity. The strange irony, not lost on me, is that for many soldiers, jumping out of airplanes or facing enemy fire can seem easier than embracing the identity of a family man. I reckon, alright, you know what? Let me think about that. Yeah, because family man is like a long term forever, right? And then facing enemy fire, even though you can die, all the people around you are probably like it's probably just for a few days only at most. Where family man is forever, right? So if you want to like commit to something at that point, you're kind of like dedicating your whole life to something as well. Whereas in enemy fire, like you might lose your life, which is still bad, but it's a similar concept of like what are you gonna do with your life, sort of thing, right? Which is why there's a certain level of difficulty for it. I reckon my husband often felt that same frustration did in art class, wanting to run away from the suffocating normalcy of it all. Once you've been in the military, done tours in Afghanistan, watched fires consume towns in Southeast Asia as refugees carried everything they owned, there's no going back to the ordinariness of life. Not once you've smoked a cigar on the edge of a town, rifle in hand, feeling like you're watching the end of the world. You're watching the end of someone's world. Your purpose became witnessing the destruction of worlds, one after another. Then you are sent back, and you're expected to return to civilian life as if nothing happened. It doesn't work. I remember sitting at dinner with Jordan Peterson a few years ago, shortly after my marriage had fallen apart. I was anxious, opening up about the mess my life had become and my growing fear of the political sphere. He listened quietly, and he said I might have PTSD. At the time, I brushed it off. I couldn't picture myself walking to a clinic and getting a formal diagnosis. Looking back, I think most people with PTSD, even though with more severe experiences, never bother to seek confirmation. They just live with it, call it something else, or try not to call it anything at all. My husband, in his own way, seemed to be searching for a world where he still belonged. It always struck me as strange that he only listened to war songs, but maybe that was the only music that felt familiar, or his quiet way of letting me into his world. Redgum's I Was Only 19 comes to mind. I probably heard it 1,000 times as I stared out the window at the dry, endless Australian fields. The song recounts a young, traumatized soldier lamenting that the Anzac legends never spoke of mud, blood, or tears. You don't come across many seasoned veterans who come back with tales of the brilliance behind government decisions to invade foreign lands. Every song Mitch played started with, "Wow, here's an adventure," and ended with, "Why the hell do we do that?" Yet every year, soldiers leave for tours, listening to those same songs, only to return and ask the same question. There's a raw honesty in many military men that I deeply respect, but no one comes back from war untouched. The pain they carry doesn't stay contained, it bleeds into everything. Applause and medals often mask a harsher truth, the weight of choices made abroad, the burden of regret, and memories too dark to share. To truly honor soldiers, we must look past the myth. They're not untouchable heroes, they're human, and the same systems that elevate them can also shield the worst among them. Sometimes the line between soldier and criminal is thin, just different roles in the same chaos, and when the state grants power, it doesn't just blur the lines between justice and violence, it can erase it entirely. It was through conversations and immersion with men from this world that I realized I wasn't uniquely disillusioned. We hear constantly about the corruption in politics, but power plays out in every part of life. It's the core of human interaction, and that makes most of life political in some way. While the military makes the cost of power politics more visible, even the quietest professions can conceal deep disillusionment through betrayals, bureaucracy, and subtle forms of cruelty that are harder to name, let alone prove. Neither my husband nor I had a missing limb or audio scar to show for the chaos we lived through, but we carried the aftershocks in subtler ways, and habits and instincts that almost certainly define our dysfunction. Once Mitch moved to Canada and asked me to marry him, I was completely devoted. I had no interest in any other man or life path. Our relationship really didn't start out controlling. At first, everything felt like a partnership, but after I got pregnant and stopped working, something began to shift. Slowly, the balance tilted. He had all the chips now, financially, logistically, emotionally, and I didn't mind, not really. If anything, it resembled the dynamic that conservative, traditionalist spaces I spent years in had framed as ideal. I never thought he used that imbalance against me, and for a while he didn't. Not until after I gave birth. Holy shit, what? Let me think. So everything was good. She actually loved him and was willing to give up everything for him, and then he used his power dynamic against her. Is it power dynamic or is it some dynamic? Some kind of dynamic. Alright, let me pause it there. Yes.
Alright, to continue. Just weeks postpartum, he gave me the first major ultimatum. Move to Australia or I'll divorce you and leave you a single mother. I was blindsided. I wish I had the clarity or strength to say, no thanks, I'm good. But I didn't. I cried, I felt betrayed, and then I said yes. I told myself I could still hold everything together if I just tried hard enough. So I left for Australia, leaving behind the support system I'd always dreamed of having, half hoping the man I thought I'd marry would be waiting for me there. Deep down, I already knew he existed only in my head. This ultimatum just made it real. The man I thought I married would never behave this way. I should have listened to that voice, because after that move, something in our dynamic shifted forever. Okay, pause, right? Because obviously what she says is right. The fact that her husband at that time said, yo, come here or I'm going to divorce you. Basically kind of that's a nightmare, first of all. And second of all, it kind of shows how there's a lack of thought to her on how bad this is for her, sort of thing. That right there, just kind of shows you that her husband,
Yeah, it doesn't like that is a red flag. I can't explain it very well. But you can just feel it, right? You don't need to explain. You can just kind of feel something's wrong. So it's hard to put into words, but she's right. But instead of saying like she that's her husband at the same time, she should be able to like express her feelings without any fear or something. You shouldn't like have to feel in order to talk to your own family that you gotta step on eggshells or something. That's really bad too. There's no like where's like the family love and warmth in that case, right? So instead of saying like yes or like I'll agree, I think she also should like added on how she really felt after that, right? Because you need to connect, you need to like kind of connect your heart with them, instead of like holding your feelings back. I wish she was able to do that. So obviously, I don't think that just like leaving somebody just because they exhibited that terrible behavior is the right decision either. I think you should have just like voiced it out. From that point on, our relationship started to revolve around ultimatums. He would say jump, and I asked how high, except jump usually meant I'll leave you if you don't do X. And I always did X, even when it chipped away at me. I thought that was loyalty. I thought that's what love looked like, sacrificing, compromising, trying harder. But really, I was erasing myself, not least of all because I was completely isolated. I no longer had my job, my family, or even my hobbies, only my son and him. To make matters worse, the idea of our marriage failing felt like an existential threat. No matter how many times I messed up, I genuinely wanted to live up to the ideals I championed publicly. The moral person, the defender of family, I wanted to become that person. I clung to the belief that even if I had stumbled upon the path, I could still get this part right. If there's one thing I could redeem, one role I could succeed in, it had to be this. I thought that if I could just be successful at marriage, it would fix me, but the idea was a recipe for disaster from the start. I came out hard against the trad life movement in the last few years. I received significant pushback from traditionalists, many accusing me of being a jaded feminist who was never truly trad to begin with. If there's one thing I can give those critics, is that they're right. I shouldn't have characterized my marriage as trad. My life was too messy to ever create something that resembled the traditional vision I so desperately wanted. I was holding together the fragmented pieces of what I wished my life and marriage would look like, even as they slipped through my fingers. I think my righteous defiance against the trad movement came from watching people I knew do everything right, the way the books and sermons told them to, and still fail. And it came to my own genuine efforts to make that vision real for myself. The energy I once poured into YouTube videos and documentaries I now channeled into sleepless nights, obsessively trying to save my marriage. People online act like there's some set of instructions you can follow to avoid divorce, but until you've been there, you can't possibly understand how foolish that idea is. We can't control others, and trying to do so only hurts both ourselves and them. Okay, I mean, that's a pretty absolute statement, so I don't fully agree with that, right? I feel like you can still control others. I think I remember a quote that Andrew Tate said. He said that he says, what he's saying, like, if you can emotionally control someone, you can totally control over them. I guess I interpret that as like, people are very emotional, right? They kind of live for emotion. They want to be happy, be happy. They don't want to be sad, so they try to like. I think even Lauren, she wasn't so happy, and she like imagined marriage as a very happy sort of thing. So when she got into marriage, she was really happy, and she wanted like to keep that happiness, even though it seems that it was falling away. So that's what she's been doing. Or maybe proving me wrong, because she's also saying that it's not making her happy, huh? Alright, anyways. So we can't control others, and trying to do so only hurts both ourselves and them. Traditional living is possible, but it's not the idyllic 1950s Norman Rockwell painting. It's messy, hard, and complicated. In the era of the internet, with its face-tuned videos of models making breakfast cereal from scratch and photos of Nordic women surrounded by babies on farms, that image became the goal. It was the vision that many people aspired to, but it was unrealistic, and truth be told, I didn't even want that perfect fantasy. I was okay with simplicity. Yet what I ended up with was anything but. I'll take responsibility. I rushed into a relationship far too quickly. And while I can point out the flaws with the trad movement, the truth of my own failure runs much deeper. It wasn't an ideology that warped my brain the most. It was the overwhelming saturation of the fast-paced world of politics and clickbait-driven media. As I grew older and became more entrenched in internet commentary, I fell into a common trap within the political world, prioritizing what is said over what actually is. Surface level agreement on values became enough for me to overlook the deeper work of seeing how those values played out in real life. It was like mistaking a clickbait headline for true understanding, skimming the surface without real engagement. That mindset seeped into my relationships. I convinced myself that agreeing on topics like religion, marriage, or family meant we truly shared those values. But in real relationships, those truths only reveal themselves through consistent action, not words. I knew I hadn't always lived up to my ideals and told my husband that before we married. So I believe we're on the same path. He wanted to leave behind dating apps and hookup culture. All right, stop right there. That will be my red flag number 2. If they came from dating apps and hookup culture, they had a history of dating apps and hookup culture, and their history, because of that, they have experiences in that. They know, they probably know game, basically, what I'm trying to say. And if they know the game, I call that manipulation, right? To some degree, I feel like he sort of love bombed her, manipulated her, and she fell for it. Like, oh yeah, it's just fantasy. I love it. Boom, quick marriage, and then you kind of see him for who he really is. Like, he did that sort of like in a fake kind of way, right? But that's one point. On another point, it kind of did work to get you in marriage in the first place. It's just maybe he didn't keep it up. Oh well, maybe this is why a lot of women say you should be yourself. A lot of men say, no, don't be yourself. I feel like this is the reason why. Anyways, he wanted to leave behind dating apps and hookup culture. I wanted to heal from my own past. We talked about reconnecting with the church and building something real, grounded in family and community. But I failed to consider that someone might echo my worldview not out of conviction, but because they simply wanted access to me. I had spent so much time analyzing the obvious clashes, left versus right, Islam versus Christianity, that I lost sight of a deeper conflict, the spiritual moral complexity of individuals. I assumed that adopting a label revealed a person's character, but it doesn't. That assumption distorted my judgment and left me blind to reality. The constant pressure to simplify, to win arguments instead of to seek understanding, changed the way I thought. I became obsessed with being right, as if life could be navigated like a scientific formula. This is what much of modern conservative culture has become, facts over feelings, but forget that some feelings are part of our moral compass. Emotions like guilt, joy, and love aren't weaknesses, they're signals that can guide us. Reducing life to checklists and facts may offer clarity in the short term, but it strips away the deeper layers. The truth about ourselves is that too much overthinking and over-reliance on our own perceived intelligence can bury us in a sea of self-deception. I was drowning in that sea. On top of that, my self-worth had shifted. I was no longer tied to the millions of people that on the internet. Instead, I had anchored it to my husband's opinion of me. He became my new god. My worth was tied to proving not only that I was lovable, but also that I was capable of love. Worse still, I couldn't escape my past. While my online fame may have initially drawn my husband to me, my star was fading, and all that was left was a one-sided Wikipedia page that labeled me as a political extremist. It wasn't that the label was entirely baseless. There were moments when I wasn't that the label was entirely... There were moments when I arguably could have been described that way, but those moments existed alongside far more than told a different story. Reducing an entire human being to a handful of quotes, some pulled from my teenage years, seemed absurd. I wouldn't have cared so much about it at all if my past and perceived lack of future did not weigh so heavily on my husband. I was constantly reminded that my notoriety made me dead weight, that the version of me anyone could Google was the reason the family life I longed for would never happen. The juice isn't worth the squeeze was the phrase I heard most often when he talked about ending things. The juice isn't worth the squeeze? What does that mean? The juice was the phrase I heard most often when he talked about ending. Alright, so basically, when her husband talked about ending things, ending the marriage, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. I guess that means she isn't willing to give up or make the effort to achieve it. Oh man, okay. The ultimate she's talking about then, huh? Was my past haunted our relationship, resurfacing again and again as proof that I didn't deserve the white picket fence dream. It wasn't just in his head. My reputation followed us everywhere. Once Mitch took me along to a work dinner, a simple gesture that quickly turned complicated. One of his coworkers filed a contact report afterward. When you work for the government in a high-level position, especially in federal security roles, you need a security clearance. A contact report is essentially a note to the security team saying you've come into contact with someone deemed undesirable, maybe a criminal, a terrorist, or in my case, a controversial YouTuber. I had been there with our baby, just happy to leave the house and join Mitch somewhere. It was a small pleasure, a rare moment of joy in my otherwise isolated life. That joy evaporated when I learned about the report, which quickly started to cause problems at my husband's job. The truth of my own inadequacy hit me hard. I really was dead weight in his life, and he made sure I knew it. Bro, why do you thinking like this is not right? But I'm feeling more and more like disgusted by that husband now. Excuse me. In a marriage, when you marry someone, that is such a serious thing, right? You guys are becoming one, and you cannot be separated or over anything, right? Basically, almost anything. You guys made a vow at the marriage ceremony in front of they're religious too, right? So they probably made it to their own god too. They should have made the vow to their god, and over something as tiny as this, he's willing to say no. That is so that's terrible. And look at her, she's sacrificing so much of herself just for the sake of upholding the marriage too, right? She's actually doing her duty in the marriage, doing all that. All right. In a desperate attempt to compensate for my unmanageable shortcomings, I threw myself tenfold into trying to be the perfect partner. Cooking, cleaning, putting on dresses and high heels to welcome him home, offering compliments, buying small gifts. I even went on medication at his request that I fix my ADHD. Another way I supposedly failed as a wife. Sometimes he would mention that $5,000 would make things a little better. My stomach would tighten. I had no income of my own, only dwindling savings, and I was clinging to his career to survive. I feared he might abandon us and leave us with nothing, but I pushed that thought aside. I gave him the money, whatever it took. I know how that sounds, madness. But I was used to madness and became my new normal. Okay, I'm curious. This kind of wife is almost a dream wife. She was living the dream wife for her husband, and yet he feels like it's not. I don't believe it. What is it, Mitch Robinson? Shoot, what was her name? I wonder what happened in. Oh shoot, of course not this person. Lawrence Southern. Mitch. Who's the Mitch person? Who's Mitch? Oh, I can't find it. I want to know what happened to this dude that makes him be the way he is now. He's handed something so good, and he's treating it like crap. All right. Anyways, he would leave for work early, and towards the end, he wouldn't come home until late at night. I sit alone in the kitchen, reheating our dinner, and staring at a text message that had said, "Be home in 30 minutes, 5 hours ago. No calls returned." I'm not sure if the isolation and loneliness were eased or deepened by the fact that the family next door seemed to exist in a similar dynamic. I would exchange polite nods with the Muslim family. The wife wore a headscarf when I took walks around the soulless neighborhood in Canberra. Yeah, I mean soulless. The whole city was manufactured, designed purely to house transient civil servants. No history, no life. I sit in that big, echoing house with its cold tile floors, listening to the shouts from next door as her husband erupted again. I hear the thuds of something thrown, sit there twiddling my thumbs, wondering if I should call the police. But then I remember, if we started calling the cops over raised voices and slammed doors, it'd be them at my house next. During one of the husband's outbursts, so I just sit there, feeling a strange kind of kinship with the woman next door. Each day, I hated myself a little more than I thought possible. I heard the words, "I'm divorcing you," at least once or twice a month from the moment I had my son. It's so often the uncertainty and anticipation of something that is worse than the actual thing. My entire world was hanging in the balance daily, stuck in a foreign country with no family to help, no job, no plan for a different future. I generally started to go insane. Okay, pause one more time. I'm suspecting something right now. Is that she's saying the moment we had her son, all right? The moment, all right. So I feel like Mitch has an insecurity, which is that of course, parents love their son a lot, right? Especially when they first born. It's cute. You guys have a baby. She's showing love to her baby. I think Mitch didn't say this out loud, right? But he secretly feels jealous that Lauren, the mother, is showing more love to the baby than she is to him, and that's why he's acting all this cold and this how he's acting. I'm that's what I'm guessing right now, because I feel like that could definitely happen, and it would explain a lot of things, right? It would explain his behavior. or it would at least explain why after she had her baby, why he's feeling this way. Which is, it kind of shows that maybe he doesn't really like that. He doesn't see. You should see the baby as family too. Like but I have read somewhere that some people, they do feel like this weird like jealousy that some. It's not just a baby. Like it can even be a dog, right? Let's say you guys get pet this time. All of a sudden, you notice your significant other showing more love to your pet than. Or even some like those videos where some people are like, oh, good morning, thank you, bye, to their AI their AI more than their own like husband or wife or something. That's like ridiculous. Anyways, I truly felt as though I was in hell when I was in Australia, living as a stay-at-home wife. My life felt like an emptiness, a void. I never thought of myself as suicidal, but in Australia I began fantasizing about it. I sat on the kitchen floor drinking wine, hoping for numbness, but I couldn't even get drunk. Even my vices were letting me down. I thought about hanging myself, not because I planned to, but because the idea brought me peace. Maybe it was postpartum depression, maybe just everything crashing down at once. Either way, I catch myself drifting into those thoughts more often than I like to admit. I pictured the logistics, imagining the world going black, but they were just dreams. I knew I wouldn't follow through because I had a child. No matter how much I was struggling, he was still good. He deserved a mother who would fight for him. That kind of love, pure and simple, pulled me out of the worst place I'd ever been. I must also mention here that I have families in Australia who took my son and me in, gave us a bed to sleep on, a warm meal, and a shoulder to cry on when we had nowhere else to stay. The kindness we experienced from them got us through this time in ways that I could never repay. I certainly wasn't the only one who found myself in such a strange dark place at that time in our world cycle though. To make matters worse, because somehow that was still possible, my marriage was crumbling at the height of the COVID-19 lockdowns. Any attempt to find joy outside the devastation of my personal life was met with heavy-handed government regulations or total shutdowns. Social events were banned, travel was restricted, even going to the grocery store was governed by guards at the entrance, forcing you to scan your tracker app. Nobody spoke, and if they did, their words were muffled behind a mask. I had managed to leave the country once before the total lockdown, sometime around June of 2020. Upon my return to Australia, I was taken directly from the airport by the military and placed in a facility for what turned into a week or two. Though honestly, the days blurred together as I sat in that small windowless room with an infant. I hadn't returned to social media at that point. I was isolated in ways I had never experienced before. It had been a year since I left the internet, hoping to escape the nightmare of social media and comply with the Australian government's demands. In June, my visitor visa was upgraded to a partner visa, which meant the condition to stay out of politics could potentially be circumvented. I finally had the chance to return, and some part of me hoped maybe I could change the story. Save my marriage, earn Mitch's respect again, or at least reclaim something outside the nightmare I was living. So I published a video titled Why I Left and Why I'm Back. Hey, isn't that, let me go with that. Why I Left and Why I'm Back. Lawrence Southern. Oops, not this one. Is it a while ago? Oh, okay. Can't. Oh, that she was not feeling happy during these times, huh? Okay, I can't find it. Oh well. I'll just continue. The video was met with mixed reactions. Half the comments were from people still angry and demanding explanations for Milo's article. While others felt I didn't seem genuine, I understood to a degree. I wasn't being entirely honest and people sensed it, though they misinterpreted my reasons. It's not that I was trying to deceive anyone, I just wasn't about to say, hey, this is the only job I can still do because I'm internationally cancelled, my marriage is imploding, and my husband might leave me and our child with nothing. So anyway, who's ready for some wacky commentary about the wokey left? The next year was a blur of desperate attempts to make everything work, all while slipping deeper into my depressive hell. I posted all sorts of nonsense about how great my life was going. Late at night, while my son slept, I make YouTube videos hoping to build some sort of nest egg. I tried to rebuild my public image with posts about finding true happiness and peace as a mother and wife. While the mother bit was true, I was also desperately trying to conjure the other half into existence with the right attitude. Looking back now, I couldn't help but find it all quite tragic and nauseating. The posts of me baking, the selfies in the mirror showing how quickly I had bounced back to fitness and health after pregnancy. The truth was I couldn't gain weight even if I tried. I was becoming skeletal, wasting away both mentally and physically. By June 2021, I was pleading with my husband to let me visit my family in true Crazyland fashion. He threatened divorce if I went, claiming we couldn't be apart while things between us were so volatile. But things were always volatile, and I hadn't seen my family in over a year. Bro, it's your family. You guys are family, dude. Why would you marry someone and not want them to see their family? Let them heal. I hadn't seen my family in over a year. Every flight I'd booked had been canceled due to travel restrictions. At the time, leaving the country required multiple applications and valid reasons. I thought visiting my dying grandmother, seeing my family after a year of isolation, and attending my best friend's wedding qualified. The government disagreed. I missed the wedding and my grandmother passed. Only after submitting her death certificate was my request to leave finally approved. Alright, you know what? Second thing, right? If you're in a marriage and your marriage is sucking, it's failing, alright? And you know that too. I feel like the best thing you could be doing is visiting your parents, like visit her family with her and be like, yo, we're having trouble, can you help us out? Because they probably went through whatever you're went through, so they can offer wisdom. Their marriage is still holding well together, all right? Because she's mentioned her grandparents, and they're old. They're like, they definitely could help, right? That, to me, instead of like doing things on your own because it's clearly not working, you obviously need help. Alright, in July 2021, I finally got confirmed seats on a flight to Vancouver. I had just 2 weeks to see my loved ones and hopefully recharge before I had to return to the exhausting battle of trying to save my marriage. Mitch allowed me to leave at the last minute, but still, there was a problem. The government had not approved my 1-year-old son's application to travel. They said he didn't need to come with me. I was horrified. The idea of being separated from my 1-year-old son for 2 weeks was out of the question. My husband worked and couldn't care for him alone. It was impossible, but the government didn't care. They are the government after all, and bureaucracy isn't about making sense. I heard stories of people escaping the Soviet bloc with fake documents and secret contracts, seen it in movies, read about it in class. I never imagined I'd find myself in a remotely similar situation. But as things got more desperate, I remembered my old media connections. I logged into Twitter, scrolled through my contacts, and found the number of a government minister with ties to immigration. I sent a small, desperate request. To my surprise, he agreed. The next day, my child and I were approved to leave. Alright, so that's corruption, isn't it? He should have followed procedures, but instead he went for humanity. Alright, anyways. I was overwhelmed with joy when the email came. I was finally going to see my family, but the relief was quickly followed by guilt. I spent the last few years watching families get torn apart by lockdowns. The year before, I barely made it onto the last flight back to Australia before the borders closed. At the gate in Vancouver, we sat silently waiting for updates. Then came the announcement. This will be the final flight. All others were cancelled indefinitely, with no indication of when travel will reopen. Those of us who boarded were surrounded by the heart-wrenching sound of manic sobbing from people who didn't make it on, fighting with airline employees, begging to be reunited with their loved ones, unsure of how many months or even years they'd be apart. No matter my own personal turmoil, I was lucky. Very few people had the connections I did to leave Australia. Countless families were psychologically devastated in ways that continue to linger today. Countless families stayed separated and missed births, weddings, funerals, moments that should have been shared but were lost forever. With mandatory tests and quarantine, my 1-year-old getting on that plane posed no threat to anyone. Even the most stringent lockdown supporting experts would have agreed. Allowing him on that plane was a simple matter of paper pushing. How many lives would have been changed had they received the same grace I did? She's right, dude. But they went against paper pushing, so then again, like, this is the overall big debate of whether you should do something because it's better, but it is against procedures, and there's so much procedures out there nowadays. Policies, laws, rules that people have instilled in other people, paperwork, all of those procedures that everyone has created and expect other people to follow. The question is, when can you break those procedures, right? When I arrived at the airport for my July 2021 trip, the Australian government detained me. They said I had to hand over all my devices, phones, laptops, hard drives, along with the passwords, or I wouldn't be allowed to see my family. After a year of trying, it was the first flight I finally managed to book. After everything I've been through just to reach that point, I was too hollowed out to resist. A younger version of me might fought back, but I handed everything over. I felt violated by disassociated. I just wanted to go home. They took everything. Messages with my husband, photos of my child, personal journals, old conversations, even my search history, I reckon. Every private part of my life was now theirs. No charges were filed. There was no terrorism, no violence, no plot, because there was nothing to find. But the invasion was complete. I had grown used to it. My life no longer felt like it belonged to me. It belonged to systems, to strangers, to governments, not to me. Finally, back in Canada, my son and I were quarantined in a small hotel room near the Vancouver airport. It was there that my marriage ended over a text message. The fuck? I was there that my marriage ended over a text message. He said I should have seen it coming, that my decision to travel had sealed our fate. I tried everything. I reached out again and again, hoping there was still something left to salvage. I emptied my savings on therapy, sent him money he said would help, asked family members to call and talk to him on my behalf. Nothing worked. He stopped replying. Even photos of our son went unanswered. And then came the final blow. He told me he was done, that staying involved, even just as a father, would only distract him from building the new family he wanted. I couldn't understand how someone could walk away from the family they already had. Alright, what that dude did was now at this point a very serious violation of not only his marriage vow, but damn, dude, like you kind of wonder what happened to his soul at this point, right? What the fuck? Damn. Jesus, dude. Like, what is his where is his moral compass at this point? Holy crap, that's serious. And I think he should be scared of where he's heading to in the afterlife at this point. Holy shit. I learned the hard way that no matter how much you give, you can't make someone stay. I was alone now. A single mother to a boy who needed me. It was the future I had feared most. But even as I desperately prayed for some epic twist of fate, I can see now that I was being pulled out of something I couldn't leave on my own. Still in the moment, I couldn't help but feel betrayed. Really? God. The one time I had tried to do right in my life, the one time I had truly selflessly given myself to something, it was taken away from me. I started to hate the vows I had grown up with. I hated the politics I defended. This doesn't happen to women, I thought. It's women who abandon their husbands. They file for 70% of divorces. How can I be the exception? I followed the holistic goals better than most. I quit my job. I prayed. I was faithful. I didn't gain weight. I made dinner from scratch, and I was agreeable to the point of delusion. How could it fall apart? How could everything feel so backwards? Was it all a lie? Alright, I hope she's not saying that she felt God betrayed her, because yeah, she's doing all these like good things, and that's for sure. But like, that doesn't mean that like, yes, good and evil. Everyone, people have sins and stuff. Like, you don't know how much sins you have. It could be that because of all the sins and bad things you did in the past, like kind of like how her husband is committing a sin right now, right? But she also committed, like everyone commits sins in the past. Just because you're doing something right doesn't mean that like everything's gonna go right all of a sudden. Like, it could be you have to pay for your past sins as well, and this is through one thing, right? As a matter of fact, if you look at it that way, paying your sins like that way, that also could mean that God is actually trying to help you out. So don't feel like God's betraying you or something, because you know for sure they that's not how God works. I guess this is just this is a sad point of humanity, is that we always think about gods with our own like human emotions and stuff, and our own like wisdom. That's one of our weaknesses. It was a reality check I needed. The false narratives I had about the world, shaped by the unreality of the internet and right-wing tropes, needed to crumble. I wasn't just being saved from an unhealthy marriage, I was being given the gift of clarity. I lived with my parents for about 7 months, mostly as a recluse. I threw myself into my work, clinging to the hope that I could raise enough money to rent a place of my own. My primary goal was to get my son out of the tiny cubby closet attached to my bedroom, but there was a darker motivation too. I wanted to escape, to rot in peace, alone. Most nights I cried myself to sleep. I would call my husband, hoping he might answer, but the silence usually stretched on. Sometimes there were flickers of hope, short conversations, or gestures that made me think things could improve, only for them to fade and be replaced with new conditions. I wondered if fixing myself would fix us, but even the counselors didn't believe I was the problem. A constant uncertainty wore me down. I wanted my son to have his father in his life, and when I realized I couldn't make that happen, I felt like I was failing him. For a while, I relied on Xanax just to sleep. It was the only thing that dulled the emotional pain enough to avoid the long hours of torment before drifting off. Oh god. Alright, that's not good. My life felt like a nightmare, and even when I did sleep, the dreams were worse. I often dream of being shot. I would try to defend myself, find a weapon, take action, but something always went wrong. The magazine wouldn't fit, the bolt would jam, and then bam, I'd be shot, jolting me awake in a panic. The dreams were vivid and unsettling. I've always had intense dreams, and they tend to reflect my emotional state. Looking back, I cringe at how melodramatic this all sounds, but grief shrank my world. I lost sight of how much goodness still remained in the world. I was stuck in a loop, mourning the life I thought I was supposed to have. Honestly, I need to feel this level of pain in order to develop a real depth of soul. In my early career, I may have been brave, perhaps just a generous word for crazy, but I was also shallow. The world seemed like a joke to me, which is why I could move through absolute chaos with such ease. I had nothing to lose because nothing meant enough to me to fear losing it, but my marriage meant something to me. It meant everything to me. I meant too much to me. I know I'm not the only one who has experienced this. I followed a variety of accounts from people who had seen their dreams of nuclear family and traditional marriage crumble. They all share similar sentiments. I came across one post recently that read, "Ever since my marriage ended, I've had the distinct feeling that I'm just waiting around to die. As though I'm treading water, only it's not water, it's molasses. I can't help but sink. How long until this passes? It's been a year and 5 months. When does the glow up start?" Jesus. My mind wasn't even thinking about a glow up though, and my only question was, when will the suffering end? It's a sentiment I hear from every woman whose marriage ends against her will. All I saw in my future was black. I have no doubt that men feel this kind of loss too, though they're less likely to speak about it openly. That's so true too. Actually, men don't really speak about it openly. They're. It's not like they're. I guess number one, they're scared too. All right, they're afraid that it's not seen as manly, and I guess in traditional role, like that is you still be manly, right? To suppress your emotion, and like just basically take it. Number two, I think they're also scared of that because they don't talk about out loud, so they're scared that when they open it up, and then if you don't acknowledge it, they feel devastated the same way. So they're scared of that as well. I felt there was nothing there, no future anymore. I existed only to keep my son alive and give him a happy life, and therefore I had to keep trudging forward by any means possible. Of course, this type of thinking invites plenty of horrendous coping mechanisms, but I'm surprised I was able to rebuild the level I did without totally falling off the wagon. By the 7th month, I had moved out of my parents' house into a small cabin on a sprawling property, surrounded by trailers and forests. My supply of Xanax had run out, I couldn't get any more. The sleepless nights returned with a vengeance. Luckily, I received a small grace of community among the people in the trailers. I began to spend my evenings around the fire with others on the property, people who, like me, were trying to escape or heal from their own complicated journeys. I'd never been interested in smoking marijuana before, but it soon became a way to dull the constant noise in my mind. It didn't make things better, but numbed the edges. Okay, bro, don't do that. Don't use drugs to, like, alright. On nights when my son was at my parents' house for sleepover, I would smoke until reality itself felt distant, even foreign. I fall into online debates, sometimes noticing I took stances completely opposite to what I believed sober. I used to think the idea that weed makes you liberal was a joke, but my grip on reality was loosening. When my son was with me, I had purpose. I stayed present. But when he wasn't, it was just me and my thoughts. The silence was unbearable. I get high and binge watch Netflix series, sink into other worlds to escape my own. I spend on my bed, staring at the ceiling, lost in a void of thoughts. If not that, I work until 4 in the morning. Anything to avoid being alone and still with my thoughts. The next morning, I switch back into mother mode. Whatever my state the night before, I did everything I could be to the parent my son deserved. When he was with me, I could smile, laugh, and stay present. I saved the hard moments for when he was asleep. I didn't want him to see that my tears or think they had anything to do with him. On the contrary, I wanted him to know that he lit up a room just by being in it, that he gave me a reason to keep going. I'm sorry, but I wish she would actually tell her son the truth, right? If she did that, it wouldn't be like her living for her son. It would, which I feel like is the same mistake that she's doing for her husband. I want her to be honest about it, and then her son might even in turn help her out, right? Her son will be understand, and it will also it would like strengthen your family bond as well. Like her son knows that he was born into a family that is so poor, probably and terrible compared to other families around him. But she has the love of he has the love of her mother, and the amount of love she's doing for him, like if she would tell him about that, he would have felt it, and he would have probably given the same way back. That would have helped her in turn, and like that's like a great family, just like right there. You probably have the dream family right there too. The people on that property were a quiet comfort too. I'll never forget the two young girls living in the van with their adopted mother. They often came to my cabin hungry. I'd make nachos they scarfed down after playing with my son. They were kind, well-mannered, and thoughtful. I teared up when they brought me a Mother's Day card. I still think about them. Their situation reminded me that the world was heavy for a lot of people, not just me. Turns out I wasn't the main character of human suffering. Who would have thought? It wasn't just the girls though. Everyone on that property had tragic, beautiful stories we'd end up laughing about around nightly fires, sharing dinners and random get-togethers. It helped my son see a version of me that wasn't just a recluse. Honestly, the sheer absurdity of it all forced me to take myself a little less seriously. My neighbors lived in sheds and cars. We'd shout bear alerts like it was the weather. We'd pour gasoline on giant pallet fires and dance to King Harvest late into the night. It was my own little redneck wellness retreat. But coronas and bonfires can only take you so far, especially when I wasn't exactly telling anyone the truth about my life, or who I really was. How could I? I was just enjoying the company, letting it temporarily soften the edges of a psychological spiral that was about to take me to even stranger places. And that brings us to chapter 20. Ooh, damn, dude, it's a long book.